Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
On behalf of St. Thomas University School of Law, I want to welcome you to this very important event. My name is Al Garcia. I'm the Dean of this law school. And I want to extend my sincere appreciation to one of our distinguished graduates, Michelle Vargas, for organizing this conference on behalf of Section 8 of the HBNA. We as an institution have been at the forefront of leading the fight to eradicate the scourge of human trafficking. First with the establishment of our Signal program in intercultural human rights, which has brought members of the world community from 60 different countries to lead the fight for justice and human rights. In 2004, we began a concerted effort to lead the fight against human trafficking in cooperation with organizations such as the HBNA, governmental and non-governmental. And in that respect, we received a $500,000 grant from the Justice Department to lead the fight against human trafficking by conducting education, outreach, and research in the field. And in conjunction with that, we established a human rights academy based on human trafficking, which specializes in training and educating people from all walks of life, from law enforcement, lawyers, healthcare providers, teachers, students, and researchers, to combat this scourge. In fact, this Monday, we will have that academy here, and it will launch. Since 2010, the academy has trained and reached out to 3,500 professionals and students, offering them up-to-date and hands-on training on the laws and policies against human trafficking, as well as implementation of that fight locally as well as worldwide. We have worked closely in conjunction with academic institutions, NGOs, governmental institutions, the State Department, the Justice Department, and universities, and internationally with Vatican. In fact, in 2011, we co-sponsored, in conjunction with the U.S. Embassy to the Vatican, a conference on international trafficking. We call the conference Building Bridges of Freedom, Public and Private Partnerships to End Modern Day Slavery. A few years ago, the president of our university, Monsignor Casal, was invited by Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Lehtinen to testify before the Foreign Affairs Committee of the U.S. Congress on that subject of modern day slavery. The committee was reviewing the authorization of the Wilberforce Act, the federal legislation on trafficking in the United States, and our institution presented its recommendations. So I want to, on behalf of this institution, welcome you and to, in essence, urge you to participate in the fight to end modern day slavery. And I want to also recognize Professor Rosa Patti, as well as Professor Siegfried Wiesner, who have led the fight, who in effect direct our Signal program in intercultural human rights, which offers an LLM and a JSD in that area. I think you will find this panel that has been put together for today extremely informative, and it will, in essence, energize you to combat this scourge and eradicate this scourge of human trafficking. So on behalf of our institution, I welcome you and thank you for being here to educate yourself on this very important issue. Thank you very much.
For those of you that are wearing suits or jackets, we're meeting afterwards to see if we can have this moved next year to the winter. My name is John Aristide, and I am the president of the HBNA for the region that encompasses the state of Florida. We represent the interests of 100,000 Hispanic attorneys, judges, legal professionals, academics, and we're very happy to be involved in this. We are involved on a nationwide level, but what the group of ladies that do here, what they do here, this is the tip of the spear. Our efforts at a nationwide level are behind and are led by what's done here. Even though we're involved with different issues with respect to unaccompanied minors, civil rights that affect our members, because don't forget, Hispanics include people of color, LGBT, women. So we're involved in a lot of issues, and by no means is this any less important than anything we do. And we're very happy to be here, but all credit has to go to the committee, which is Michelle Vargas, Revilla Bratz, and Elba Lumbi. So those are really the people that deserve the effort, along with this distinguished panel who have contributed so generously of their expertise to educate us. Thank you.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me if I don't use the microphone?
Yes.
Okay, in the back, all right. I'm Gavrila Bratz from Carlton Fields, Jordan Burt, and want to welcome you on behalf of the Hispanic National Bar Association Region 8 Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. This morning I would like to present our distinguished moderator for this morning's panel, Professor Mary Ann Franks, an associate professor at the University of Miami School of Law. We're honored that Professor Franks can be with us today to lend her advice and commentary concerning human trafficking and the general state of the law affecting women in particular. Born in Arkansas, Professor Franks began her academic career at Loyola University in New Orleans, and then as a Rhodes Scholar obtained her master's and doctorate in modern languages and literature at Oxford University. She then earned her Juris Doctorate at Harvard Law School, graduating in 2007. During her time as a student, she also garnered valuable work experience, including a clerkship at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Currently, Professor Franks is an associate professor, as I said, at the University of Miami School of Law, my alma mater, and she is the vice president of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative. Professor Franks has published and spoken extensively concerning inequality, violence against women, gender inequality, hate crimes, cyberbullying, reproductive rights, and recently concerning the prevention of what is known as revenge porn, the practice of publishing intimate media following the end of a relationship. In fact, she is currently working with U.S. Representative Jackie Spire on a federal law protecting sexual privacy. Among many honors, Professor Franks was named one of the Miami New Times' People of the Year in 2013, which described her as having fought, quote, idiocy and intolerance her whole life. We are honored that she will share, as the New Times put it, her blunt brilliance with us today. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mary Ann Franks.
Thank you very much for that very, very kind introduction. I'm not sure if the New Times was damning me with faint praise or not, but I'm really, really pleased to have the opportunity to moderate this excellent panel and have the opportunity to introduce you, however briefly, to these amazing speakers. And I will apologize in advance that there's no way that I'm going to do their amazing biographies any justice. I'm going to keep the introductions of them very, very brief because we want to make sure that we have enough time for the presentations, all of which will be 20 minutes, followed by 5 minutes for question and answer. We want to make sure that we stay on schedule and get to all these important issues. I do hope, however, that the speakers will help me with the pronunciation of some of their names, and if I butcher them, that they will let me know. And our first speaker is going to be, is it Kaleva or Kaliva? Oh, that makes it easy on me. So Kaleva Kasanga, who is the president of Here Congo. She's a Congolese American born and raised in the Democratic Republic of Congo who traveled to the United States to pursue her college education.
In 2007, she founded Here Congo, a grassroots volunteer-based organization to help respond to the escalating humanitarian crisis in the DRC, where mostly women and children were affected. She's going to speak to us today about the history, the mission, and the global outreach of Here Congo, which is to rebuild the lives of vulnerable Congolese women and children that are the victims of sexual abuse and human trafficking.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction. And I'd like to also thank the HBNA and the School of St. Thomas for having me here today. And it's great to hear that they have a long history of global outreach in human trafficking, combating human trafficking. Thank you. Okay, so I was born and raised in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a country right in the heart of Africa with more than 77 million people in population. And bordering is a landlocked country with 9 neighboring countries, as you can see. And it's a pretty huge country, the second in Africa, and almost 1/4 size of the United States. So it's a quite large country. DRC, it's potentially one of the richest countries on earth. So you have all the beautiful diamonds that all women here would love to have. And you have gold, you have cobalt, you have really massive resources in DRC. And in fact, one of the mineral that's extracted in Congo is called coltan. Coltan is used in your cell phone as a heat capacitor. If you don't have coltan in your cell phone, then it doesn't work. So that particular mineral is found in DRC in large quantities. Thank you. You also have 30 million of acres of farmland in DRC, so there's a potential for producing lots of crops. You have cereal, palm oil, coffee, cocoa, tea, rubber. So I'm really just giving you a brief history about the Congo to give you the picture of what Congo could be and what it is now and what people can benefit from. It's also capable of producing 40 million head of cattle and about 700 tons of fish. So it could be enough for people in Congo and the entire Africa. Maybe some of it can come here to Miami. So we also have some of the world events are related to Congo. The uranium that was used to produce atomic bombs that was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was extracted from Congo. Oh. So who really would like to come with me so far? Oh. Okay, Congo could be the potential premier vacation destination. We've got a rich culture, music, arts, languages, and people with more than 200 ethnic groups in DRC. And it is the 4th largest rainforest in the world and home to 3 of the world's 4 species of gray apes. And Congo music is very much related to Latin music here. And that's called the African rumba. It's a fusion of African music and Latin music. So it's very popular throughout Africa. And here we have mega biodiversity. We have some of the beautiful parks, national parks, where you have that's actually, Virunga Park is the highest biodiversity of any national park in Africa. So it is really a place anyone here would love to go. But it's not so bright. The story of Congo is not so bright. There's misery behind beauty. So the key issues here, you have the Human Development Index. DRC ranks 187 out of 187 countries. So really the last, before the last one in the entire world. And you're looking at 50% of the population have access to drinking water, have no access to drinking water. Limited healthcare system, shattered education system, infant mortality is very high, and we have issues of 2 decades of civil unrest in DRC. Congo is a country at war right now, and what is the cause of the war? As you can see, right in the middle, the card, it's right at the border, eastern Congo. That's the border of Rwanda and Congo. After the genocide, you have most of the genocidaires who created, were created crimes of genocide, were going to Congo to seek refuge. And it's about more than 2 million Rwandans were going into DRC. And as a result, the Rwandan government and Ugandan government invaded the DRC in an effort to root out some of the remaining perpetrators who, they were hiding in DRC. And the Congolese government was intervening and also sought to protect its territory. Along with the Congolese, you have some other actors who joined. You're looking at Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Sudan, and Chad. So this is considered the first Africa World War. As you can see, so many countries are involved. Or you can imagine, right there's many, many refugee camps right in the eastern part of the Congo. And it's a mixture of Rwandans and Congolese who are trying to keep the territory, and the Rwandans who are trying to stay in the Congolese territory as invaders. So war consequences. We have an estimate of more than 6 million dead. It is the world deadliest war after World War II. And displacement, over 2 million people are estimated to have been internally displaced since 2004, and 460,000 have fled to neighboring countries. Child soldiers, it's a big issue in DRC as well. And refugee camps, DRC ranks 4th in the world after Afghanistan, Iran, and Somalia. So there is a lot of refugee camps throughout the country. And here, in this picture, this is a refugee camp that you can see, and you can see really the people are just vulnerable. They have no protection, they have really no rights at all. And I wanted to point out, in the picture, the second picture on your right, we have Professor Narayan with me in DRC. She's a St. Thomas professor. She traveled with me to DRC on a fact-finding mission as we're trying to identify victims of sexual violence or victims of human rights. And this is a very volatile zone and it's called red zone, so pretty much it's very hard to get through. And she was courageous enough to come with me to Congo. Thank you so much for that trip. Okay, so there's what's happening to women and children in areas of conflicts. So you have rampant gender-based violence, worst cases in history. It's done in a way to diminish the population. It is done in a way to crush the minds of the people of DRC. It's done in a way to destroy the fabric of the Congolese society. Rapes as a weapon of war and a tool of genocide. So the men are killed, while the women and the girls are brutally raped or other atrocities of war crimes they're subjected to. So we have 200,000 women and girls have been raped since 1998. And an estimated 80% of the refugees are women and children. So we have high incidences of human trafficking and prostitution. So nearly half of the fatalities are kids under the age of 5. Here there's a woman running, not knowing where she's going, if she's gonna leave or not, because behind her, people are shooting. And here, that's the hospital that we visited in Africa. All these women that you see there have been victim of rape or have been simply taken out of areas where they can be easily trafficked or as sex slaves. And that child that you see there was literally found on the street vomiting with no place to go. So we just had to take him and take him to the hospital. Upper right, you see a mixture of women coming from all walks of life in different religions, where all these women, they are mostly between the ages of 60 to 80, and they all are victims or survivors with gender-based violence of some sort. So as you can see, it's really done to crush the minds of the people of Congo. And there, in our first intervention in DRC, we're just trying to deliver some medical supply in DRC. So human trafficking has multiple levels in DR Congo. You have external human trafficking, which high number of incidents is mostly in large cities such as Kinshasa, which is the capital, or other large cities in DRC. And that would be cases like here, where girls are offered a job overseas. Most of the time, it's towards Lebanon, and some of them would end up here. And we also have seen a similar situation like what's happening really in Ethiopia. Just last year, we had a call from the office of the state attorney. They were trying to identify 3 women here in Miami who said they were from Ethiopia, and they were brought in by a Saudi Arabian princess. So as the next day, as they tried to find them, they disappeared. So I'm thinking that's the same issues with DRC women. They're brought in here, they're brought in Europe, everywhere. And adoption is also an issue in DRC. Right now, children are illegally adopted, and then they're trafficked out of the country. So they end up in the hands of people who should really be around children. And now, the issue in DRC, the most permanent problem is the internal human trafficking, which is really sex exploitation and forced labor. As you can see here, you see men working in mine, and a man in uniform is monitoring and watching them. And here you see children also working in mine, and with a man with a gun, really monitoring them. They're forced labor. So as for women, they are taken as sex slaves. So they are really facing 2 issues. One is gender-based violence. They are raped really savagely, and then secondly, they're taken in the bush to serve as sex slaves. So human trafficking is one of our conflicts. Sex exploitation. So traffickers prey on weak refugees, young women, and displaced population. And women and children have no protection. So stateless refugees have no rights or support from hosting government. So you can imagine the border of Rwanda, where there's so many refugees, and that's really the perfect scenario for a human trafficker, because these people will not be protected by the Congolese government. So they will not have any right to persecute anyone because they have no papers. And it's really prevalent in that section of DRC. And there is a culture of impunity. Basically, the legal system is very weak, or non-existent, we should say. And lack of coordination on the ground. As grassroots organizations, it's very difficult to really maneuver through the DRC and do the work that we need to do. So there are territories that are controlled by different organizations. And if I need to go through and have access to women who've been, or prevent human trafficking, or try to identify survivors of human trafficking, it's very difficult to maneuver through the country. And the country right now is a tier 3 country, so there's no efforts being done at this point really by human trafficking, except some efforts with adoption. Right now, the DRC has suspended the exit visa for children. So we hope that as they suspended, that we'll try to work out some laws to protect the children when they're adopted and they get to the right families. So we have a challenge here. So when we look at human trafficking or gender-based violence, especially with DRC and continuing conflicts, and several peace agreements have been signed, but really nothing has been reached as far as peace or long-term peace. How do we deal with these women? How do we help them to get justice? Do we look at individualized justice, or we looking at societal peace and reconciliation? So these are the challenges that we're faced when we're trying to assist the people of DRC. And there was an effect of the threat of individual state, because when a woman will go and have a case of sexual violence, well, she can expect the next morning or the next day to be threatened. So, or simply, it would not be taken into consideration because the perpetrator would bribe, you know, and there'll be almost no justice. So, what we're looking at is criminal tribunal prosecution against members of the military and other high-ranking perpetrators. So there has been some persecutions of high-level ranking perpetrators, warlords, who have plenty of militia groups operating right in the bush and creating all kinds of chaos at Hague. So that's very encouraging for DRC. And really, the issue that we want, the goal is to create a society where crimes of sexual violence and human trafficking are not committed with impunity. So we also have, as you can see, the American Bar Association is right in DRC. They're really doing a fantastic job, and it's really through their assistance that we have, they record like all types of crimes and gender-based violence, and then they will try to follow through and get to the perpetrators at a high level. So that's how we've gotten some of the cases in The Hague. We have also an issue of unpatrolled borders. Right in eastern Congo there, you see there's a lot of movement. So the borders are pretty much just open. Is that me? Okay, Doc?
The screen's going up.
Oh, okay. What do you have information on it? You can still see. Okay, so the borders in eastern Congo are uncontrolled. There's no really difference between Congo and Rwanda, so there's a lot of movement, and there's a lot of trafficking going on the borders because we have so many refugee camps, and the movement that goes towards other African countries and finally end up here or Europe. So we have some U.S. voices for women and children of DRC. Luckily. No, we don't. Okay, so Ben Affleck, Cindy McCain, Hillary Clinton, Angelina Jolie, with UK Secretary William Hague, as well as Jill Biden, have great interest in Congo. So how do we change just keep going, right? How do we change the options for women and girls and transform communities in Congo? So we have an opportunity to reverse the statistic of gender-based violence, human trafficking, and the Human Development Index. So our target are teen moms. This is an overlooked group, but yet offering infinite potential. When people go to DRC or organizations try to help, they look at women as a whole, but they do not identify a specific group because very discouraged. They come in with a baggage and what they're going to do with the child and the teen mom. So this is the group that we really chose to work with. So our mission is to rebuild the shattered lives of vulnerable women and children in DRC by providing direct financial support for them to improve their physical, emotional, and economical well-being. And our vision is to realize a sustainable model of local support for the desperate situation of women and children in the eastern Congo and southeastern region of DRC. We envision to expand this model to the other regions of DRC. Now, we are trying to do it one life and one community at a time. Where do we work? We work at the border of DRC, where there's most conflict. That's called Eastern Congo. We work in Goma and Bukavu. approach to intervention is holistic human development. So we want to have a dynamic process of participation for women and children, and individual and collective responsibility. So not only looking at one case, but looking at how we can develop the entire community. And have women both catalysts as beneficiaries of their own development and changes. And we also want to create a culture of solidarity, because it's very easy when you are in the situation to really think alone. So we want to encourage people to think as a community, as a whole. And areas of intervention are health, community development, education, environment, protection, adequate food supply, water and sanitation, and advocacy. So we have created an integrated approach model program. How do we do this? It's a 6-month program that we put the girls through, and it's one of its kind, state certified program. So girl would form what's called the Human Development Clubs. It's 10 people will get together, and they will themselves elect a president, a committee, and we're teaching them good governance, and they will learn. We start with literacy, because it's really important for them to learn how to read and write, so that for other things that they need in life. And after that, they will do a vocational training. They either, still bad with all the pictures, but in the pictures here, you have seen women and girls learning how to do culinary arts and learning how to sew or design. These are very quick vocational training or job skills they have, so they can at least have something to hope for and be able to be responsible for themselves and their children. And these women are then used as peer educators or rural educators. So it's a win-win situation for the individual person in the community. They are trained after the program by professional doctors, attorneys, healthcare professionals, social workers, to go out in the community and give out information in public health, in human rights, in hygiene, water, sanitation, climate change. So just last month, we had 30 girls who went out in the field and reached out to 3,000 people. So that was really fantastic. So as we look at the situation in the Congo, it's really one of a unique situation, but again, it's not only Congolese who should be concerned with Congolese issues. So we look at a global outreach of the organization. How are we going to do this? So it's DRC and behind. Human trafficking does not only occur in DRC, not only in Miami, but it's a global issue. So at the local level, we are training women and men about women's rights, local and international laws. So we work with decision makers. Oh, awesome. We work with decision makers and all stakeholders to promote long-term peace and gender-based violence, to stop gender-based violence. And here we're meeting with the First Lady of DRC at one of the conferences to try to secure a meeting for women in the village. And then here we're teaching girls about human rights so they can go in the community and teach others. And here on the global side, we join the United Nations Secretary General campaign to end violence against women and girls. And we have here, last year we started an organization to bring together several organizations with a similar vision and mission to combat human trafficking and gender-based violence. And last year we had the honor of having with us Anna Lashrasky, who works very closely with the United Nations Secretary General in gender-based violence. So what is Party Unite to End Violence? That's the organization we had formed last year. It's really a consortium of different organizations and community leaders who are interested in this issue, and high school students who are really going going out there to create an advocacy platform to raise awareness about the issue. And what is our goals for this year? So to actively participating in 2 or more global or national platforms. We're invited at the End Sexual Violence Global Summit in London that was hosted by Ms. Angelina Jolie and Secretary Haig. So we had a voice at the House of Lords in London to share about what's happening in the Congo and also to share the importance of having a global voice to end violence and human trafficking. And we also have it that I'm done. Okay. I am done, and let me just so we just wanted to tell you that human trafficking has no boundary or social status or age. Thank you so much.
It's a very elegant exit, especially considering all the unfortunate difficulties that we have with that presentation. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next speaker, and maybe there'll be time later for the Q&A. I would ask the speakers, please do keep track of your time to avoid me having to flail at you, which is something that I don't want to have to do. There is a clock right up there, but hopefully we'll be able to return to your wonderful presentation in one of the other Q&A moments. So the next speaker that we will have is Professor Dr. Rosa Fati. Am I pronouncing your last name right? All right. She is a member of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace at the Vatican, and she's a professor of law and the director of the Human Trafficking Academy and the executive director of the graduate program in intercultural human rights right here at St. Thomas University School of Law.
Good morning and welcome to St. Thomas University. It's a great pleasure to work with HBNA again for so many times, and I take great pride particularly in the fact that the organizers, the leaders of this event and of so many others we have cooperated with are actually St. Thomas alumni. So both Michelle Vargas and Elba Lumby here, and I know a number of others as well. So it truly speaks for what here at St. Thomas we believe in who we are educating. Those leaders that go out that are courageous to tackle issues that might not necessarily be so popular, but at the same time do it compassionately. So thank you very much to our alumni particularly. My presentation, as you might have noted in the program, talks about shortly talking about the legal framework to combat human trafficking, and with a particular focus on the cooperation among states. Now, as I look at this audience, I see that a number of you are way well versed in the legal framework that relates to human trafficking, because I could see that you do work exactly in the field of trafficking. So I'll try to be brief on that part and then come to the angle of cooperation. When I'm teaching human trafficking law and policy class to my students here at St. Thomas, and I see I have at least one here, I tell them we start from the premise that trafficking in human beings is not just a crime like any other crime. It is a matter of human rights. And that means much more than that. You heard Kaliba during her presentation mention human rights and mention Hague and a lot of other issues that relate to the vulnerability, to those camps that she mentions that create the vulnerability to have this readily available supply of people that get trafficked, not because of their own fault. So, if we were to think how we can probably best address trafficking in human beings, we cannot simply say prosecuting the crime. Trafficking in human beings lies right at the intersection of several fields of law. Human rights law, international criminal law, and transnational law, from the perspective that we come with the so-called Palermo Protocol, the modern law that combats trafficking in human beings. Let me just shortly mention the first two and then a little bit more on the third part. If we say that trafficking in human beings is a matter of human rights law, and I strongly believe it is, we go beyond the fact that we have to prosecute a crime, in this case the crime of trafficking. When we talk human rights, we talk about states, nation states having duties that they undertake when they ratify treaties, conventions, covenants, protocols, whatever we want to call them, but they really are one thing. Just like contracts we have in domestic law, these are agreements, albeit amongst states. And they, by ratifying the treaty or convention or protocol, they agree that they will comply with whatever is noted in the articles in these treaties. And when we read human rights law, and human rights law is exactly, at least international human rights law, is exactly these treaties and agreements that relate to human rights, we see that states, nation states, promise to comply with whatever is mandated by respecting rights of their nationals, because ultimately the application is domestically. There is no application internationally. So they say we will respect human rights, meaning they are taking a hands-down approach. We won't touch the right by the state. But they also undertake to protect human rights, meaning that they will protect the rights of their nationals by creating the necessary framework, policy and legal, to make sure that somebody else is not hurting the rights of their nationals. Even another national is not hurting the right of a national. That would be the protection. And there is also a third duty that the states undertake, and that is the duty to ensure that human rights are there and are respected and are protected and are fulfilled. Now, in this last duty and responsibility, there is more than just, I'm not hurting you, and I have a law that technically protects you. So once you are hurt, you can go to the court. Great. But there is a lot of positive obligations within the responsibility, the duties of the state to ensure human rights. And it is these positive obligations on the part of the states. And we don't only think US, since we are in the US when we talk about it. We have to think of countries like Congo, where the system is not established as it is in the US, or any elements within the general system of the society. So governments do have a duty to make sure that they are creating the conditions for the individual to be able to live a decent life. Let's just keep it at a bare minimum, because that's what international law is ultimately supposed to set up, a minimum standard. Now, when we say that we have to deal with the issue from a human rights perspective, in the context of trafficking, we think immediately addressing the root causes of trafficking. We cannot address the root causes of trafficking only by looking at human trafficking as a crime. When we look at it as a crime, it happened, we will involve Ms. Martinez and say many others here on one side to prosecute the crime. But addressing the root causes would mean reducing the vulnerability of those individuals that are everywhere in this world of ours, including Miami-Dade County or Miami Gardens, we are located right now, that can at any time be victims of trafficking. So very shortly, briefly, within the time, that would be the essence of looking at the issue as a human rights, from a human rights perspective. We need to address the root causes. And as long as we don't do that, we will have at all times people that will be defrauded. And using force and violence, that is another story. But most of our individuals are not taken by force. They are not all by the movie Taken style scenario. So most of them come with the idea that Khalifa mentioned earlier, a promise of a better life somewhere, just like the plight of the kids we have at the borders now. when we talk about trafficking in human beings, a matter or at the cross-section of international criminal law, we think international criminal law as individual criminal liability, meaning that individuals, no matter where they are, they can be brought before justice. At The Hague would be the typical scenario when we talk about the ICC, International Criminal Court. And luckily for this court, now we also have precedents from those temporary ad hoc criminal tribunals that had been set up in the context of wars in the former Yugoslavia that I'm sure you've heard about, and in the context of Rwanda genocide. Two ad hoc criminal tribunals have now clearly established the case that just like rape is a crime against humanity in the context of war, so is enslavement. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia very specifically focused on enslavement, and it ensured the first convictions actually to individuals like Dragolu Kunarac for having enslaved young girls. When we read the decision of the court in that case, both the trial court and the appellate chamber as well, those of you who have been so well versed in human trafficking, you realize that this is exactly what happens absolutely everywhere today, and not just in the context of war. So the doctrine law is changing. It is progressing. So when we say that trafficking in human beings is modern slavery, we don't have to stop and think twice, oh, but there are differences. Yes, it is true that there are differences. It's not anymore legal, so it's not a legal investment to have slaves today. But for everything else, they are treated nothing more as a commodity, and that's the essence of it. The last part, we talked about having trafficking in human beings at an intersection of transnational crime. And here we can talk about that modern law that we have right now, that all of you have heard. We address it as Palermo Protocol 2000, the protocol that directly deals with suppressing and combating trafficking in human beings, and it adds a tag, particularly women and children. Now, the fact that we even have in the title of the protocol, particularly women and children, tells us something, and depends which side you will be looking at. Some will say it is because it is more common on women and children, and some others would say because the countries that negotiated at the time, they were pushing so much exactly on this issue, disregarding the fact that actually men are very much exploited, and in high seas, in the fisheries, and in the plantations, and in the mines, and in the sweatshops as well, and in the kilns, and so on and so forth. You will find men just like you find women, and sometimes you'll find more men in certain kinds of exploitations and so on. Then, Palermo Protocol also has another tag. It is supplementing the Convention on Transnational Organized Crime. So, we cannot look at this framework, international legal framework of the protocol, without very closely looking at the TOC, Transnational Organized Crime Convention. And when we look at the Transnational Organized Crime Convention, just like as the word suggests, it's not just looking at the trafficking in human beings. But what we know from it is that trafficking in human beings is considered a transnational organized crime. Is trafficking in human beings always a transnational organized crime? Absolutely not. So that's what we need to know, that while we have a framework, and the title of the convention also tells us Transnational Organized Crime Convention. So it's not a human rights convention. It deals with a crime. So it's not only trafficking that is included in it. So all kinds of organized crime that we know, drugs and weapons and smuggling of migrants and so on, all of these are organized crime. But what it requires is, it mandates states that are parties to such a convention that they will have to legislate accordingly. So states are not allowed not to have prohibitions in their domestic law when it relates to an enterprise that has some kind of organizations and that touches upon the boundaries of different states. So issues of, there are several issues that come up when we mention that, but at least mandating common offenses, mandating as much as it is possible also punishments that are commensurate to the gravity of the crime. The idea is to create certain standards because you won't be able to fight to combat human trafficking transnationally if you are not working at least minimally on certain basic standards. A transnational organized crime cannot be combated by just one jurisdiction. No matter how great the investigators on a case that relates to human trafficking in Florida, no matter how absolutely fantastic our prosecutors are, in certain cases when we are dealing with either traffickers or victims that are coming from other jurisdictions, if there is no cooperation, it's almost impossible to be able to combat the crime. And if it were for one thing that I would like to see in the TIP report, Trafficking in Persons report, just like we read for the progress that has been made, how many countries have added legislations, how many convictions have been, how many persecutions and investigations have been in the field of trafficking, how many victims have we rescued in the past year globally, worldwide. Would be good to also see how many countries and in how many cases they actually cooperated and in what aspects they cooperated. I did a research some time ago on cooperation in Eastern Europe. I am originally from Eastern Europe, Albania. So I was looking closely how are countries actually cooperating. And you realize it looks very good on paper, but you go a little bit deeper and you realize that there are absolutely unnecessary delays and there are all kinds of factors that intervene and interfere that sometimes make these prosecutions unsuccessful. Now, there are major elements of cooperation and the necessity to cooperate when we talk transnational organized crime. But maybe mentioning a few would be worth it. I say I have still 2 minutes. So, jurisdictional issues. When you talk about a transnational organized crime, you might very easily think that trafficking victims could have been recruited in some country, they have been transferred through some others, they ended up exploited in some other country, money that was made got laundered somewhere else. So here you are having multiple countries, multiple jurisdictions, domestic ones that want potentially and could lay hands on this set of circumstances of this criminal activity. But who is the country that is ultimately prosecuting? So for these matters, countries are mandated by the international law, by this legal framework on which we're presenting on, that they have to criminalize activity of their nationals even when nationals are operating abroad, certain crimes. They are, of course, in the territory, everyone knows that. They can also mandate going after offenders that harm your own nationals. But if we also look at trafficking as a crime against humanity, as it actually is, and if you read in the ICC statute, Article 7, you will see enslavement and human trafficking is very specifically mentioned there as well. It tells us that a country can actually get involved in prosecuting the trafficking crime, even if no nationals of the country are harmed, even if no nationals of the country are the perpetrators, and if the crime did not happen in its own country. And not even if the money is laundered in its own country. Because if it is a crime against humanity, it's part of those core crimes for which the world community has kind of promised that we are either extraditing or prosecuting. And having mentioned the word extradition, it brings to the second element that is also important in cooperation, extradition. Bilateral and multilateral treaties exist for extradition, but we shouldn't just think that, oh, this is like kind of a common rule and it exists, it's mandated in international law. Really, it is not. And actually, just now in the past year, in 2013, you would see a lot of efforts that are made by the UNODC, Union Office on Drugs and Crime. They want to come up with a new convention that would create the real ground basis, legal basis for AMLAC, for mutual legal assistance and extradition in matters that relate to crimes like genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity. So we would have thought that by now these crimes that everybody considers a peremptory norm jus cogens have sound basis in the law to really extradite and prosecute, and then you realize that a lot of countries, they say, oh, we have our hands tied down because it is not foreseen in the treaty. For trafficking, it is foreseen in the treaty we talked about as organized crime. But is it actually working? Really not. And I see my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farsi. So we have a few minutes now for questions from either the audience, from the other panelists. There are questions. I have questions of my own, but I want to make sure we get questions from the audience.
Question? Yes, I have a question. I'm representing a foundation relating to development, which is focused on human trafficking, prosecuting, hunting, and bringing them to justice. What I hear here is only history. I don't hear the future, how to stop the crime. For education, this is how I change after my election. I like to put education to each country. We are talking Congo, Sudan, Nigeria, I just come back. The kids get kidnapped for $1 because it's global warming, farms are dry, the farmers have nothing to eat, Al-Qaeda moving, give them $1 to kidnap whole school. Here, not talking here education, we are talking a law. Law cannot be executed if you don't change the culture in some countries, including Albania, former Yugoslavia. We have to change married kids from 12 years old to adult for 10 goats, 1 camel. I'm fighting 30 years the crime. I've been kidnapped, I've been shot. I live for the special. We have developed some system, and that's going to help you all. It's called microfinance, empowering the woman, which no mother will sell the child. We are working with India, a lady, which we are going to the bordellos and buying the mother and the child out of the bordellos. See, now I get angry. I'm fighting the crime 30 years. I have no respect for God. I please all of you here, and I am so impressed seeing a woman, finally, you declare the fight. If woman does a rights, we don't understand these things. I'm the father, my child was victimized here in Hallidale. And this person is still president of foundation of the association. Where is the justice to my child? She is a child like all other billions which are victimized right now. How I can remove the president of Harvard Women Association, which has a 2 conviction, sexual violence on minor, 8 years old, and repeat violence on mother, and he's still president. Ladies and gentlemen, United States has no justice to remove this person to victimize other child, your grandchild.
Dr. Fati, would you like to respond to some of the
Can you please?
Yes,
Yes.
sure. First of all, talking about, you said education. Education is part of what I noted as addressing the root causes. Of course, we do not have time to dwell onto those, but if we want to, let's say, give some flesh to this word, root cause is what it is. First of all, it would mean prevention. So when I said rather than dealing with prosecution once the crime happens, let's see whether we can do something there so that individuals are not trafficked. How can we do it? Numerous ways, and we have to be creative, and I commend you for the great work that you're doing with microfinancing, because I think that's an important one, and I've seen it in so many parts of the world too. Education, you need to raise awareness in schools and so on. This is what we are doing with the Human Trafficking Academy, for example, that starts next week. I know there are a couple here that are attending, and that's what we mean, educating. When we said 3,500 people, we meant it, we counted them. We did not just make up a number. Over 3,500 people, that Dean Garcia mentioned, have been educated in the field of trafficking so that they know what it is about, and also to educate cultures as well, as you say. One of the aspects of my research work is also the issue of culture and religion. And I think there is an utmost important role on the part of the religion to be played. I go regularly to church, and I know many of you do too. But if we ask how many times we heard talks on the issue of trafficking there, I can tell you one, at the time when we, with the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops, organized an ad hoc committee, and we kind of mandated to have a 1 day of saying and mentioning and addressing the issue. I think within culture and religion, there are enormous opportunities to address the issue of trafficking, to educate, in order to use your term, so people do not fall prey. Now, you said you bought out mother and child from a brothel. That means that you had some money to do that.
Yeah.
That money is coming from somewhere. So this is a programmatic aid that, amongst others, this great republic is putting every single year in so many programs worldwide. And this is the money that comes from so many generous donors that want exactly to help out a shelter that opens up there, and so on and so forth. Now, there is so much need for more, and then we know that. But again, I really commend you for the great work that you've been doing. As for the other issue, I think we have a lot of lawyers here. Maybe you also contact HBNA later for
I
that
just
guy.
will tell
and
you from
somebody
now
like
on
that.
that I will talk to my legal department and administration. Next year, United Nations with my administration will help you do maybe 1-2 days event, and she will address to the leaders that I will cooperate and help you much I can to solve the problem.
Very nice.
I really appreciate this, what you guys doing.
Thank you. And we thank you.
Moving on to our next speaker, who is Barbara Martinez, and she is, I think, a familiar face to many of you already. She's with the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office Criminal Division, where she is the chief of the Special Prosecution Section, where she supervises the deputy chief and 7 assistant United States attorneys to prosecute cases involving child exploitation, human trafficking, gang-related activity, and violent crimes resulting in death or serious bodily injury.
Good morning. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to take the microphone just in case to talk about this very important issue and to be among so many people who are really experts in this area. My presentation is going to cover the federal prosecution of human trafficking cases here in South Florida. During the next 20 minutes, I hope to give you a better understanding of what it is that we're doing here to combat human trafficking, and to hopefully help you to better understand what, through case examples, what is happening right here in our own backyard. So we begin with what is human trafficking, and I know that everyone here probably has their own idea of what it is and a definition. Legally, in summary, it's recruiting, transporting, obtaining, or maintaining another person for compelled service. This could be labor or commercial sex. And as you heard Dr. Patty mention, it's often referred to as modern-day slavery. But the truth is that neither one of these definitions, or any definition that you find in any statute, really conveys to people what human trafficking is about. And the essence of human trafficking is that it is about the exploitation and suffering of many people worldwide. And I think that if you understand that very simple concept, that it is so much easier to understand that the difference, between trafficking and smuggling. That these are not interchangeable terms. Very important as lawyers, as law enforcement, as community members who claim to want to combat human trafficking, that we know the difference. And that is that exploitation is at the core of human trafficking, whereas when we're talking about alien smuggling, we're talking about transportation. Now, does human trafficking mean that victims or defendants have to travel across borders? I think that most of you here know that that is absolutely not the case. And I point out to you as a federal prosecutor, and I think any prosecutor will tell you, that traffickers do not care about borders. It is about property. It is about exploiting people. They don't care about county lines, and they don't care about geography. Now, we know that there are many different forms of human trafficking, and some are not listed here, such as child soldiers and other very important ones. Again, I'm focusing on what we see mostly here in South Florida. And what we see is a lot of sex trafficking and forced labor. And you know that forced labor can be different things. We're talking about involuntary domestic servitude. Domestic workers who typically are living at a home, people like a nanny. They're provided with living quarters by someone that they work for, their employer. Or we have debt bondage, imposition of illegal costs and debts on migrant workers is an example. There are many factual scenarios, and that's what makes human trafficking so complicated, that when somebody wants to know what is this scenario, is it a human trafficking situation, it is not always easy to determine. In my view, and what I tell law enforcement officers who call me all the time with unusual circumstances, things that I haven't seen or heard of before, is you've got to have three elements for human trafficking. We need vulnerability, and that's obviously the victim has to be vulnerable. There are many different ways that a victim can be vulnerable, and we'll go through that in some of the cases. Exploitation, labor, or services. Now, most situations that I get calls about have the first two elements, but not always the third. So, human trafficking here in South Florida. We have been referred to as ranking third in the country by press, by Polaris Project, which hosts a national hotline, by non-governmental organizations. Obviously, this is not something that it's not a badge of honor. But what makes Miami so unique, in my view, and so special, also makes us very vulnerable to trafficking. And that is that it is very diverse, that we have migrant workers, tourists, that we have immigrants, that we have people from all over the world who are here, and it is very easy to hide. And it is very easy to get lost in all of this diversity and this huge population. So I can tell you that since 2007, we've prosecuted almost 100 defendants. That does not in any way reflect the number of trafficking or traffickers that are out there. I think that there are a lot more, and we're working with our state counterparts to improve and to get better at finding traffickers. But victims, we've rescued more than that, for certain. And we found trafficking scenarios in model agencies, in commercially fronted brothels, that's homes, in Homestead, in West Palm Beach, in nice areas, in bad areas, employment companies, massage parlors, strip clubs, and escort services. So what do the human trafficking victims look like? Honestly, they look like anyone that you would see anywhere. You really cannot profile traffickers and you cannot profile victims. You have U.S. citizens, males, females, children, runaway youth, children who come from good family homes, those living in poverty, drug addicts. And when I say vulnerability, again, it's not based on where you come from. It's where you are at that moment. Are you under the influence of drugs? Are you at the wrong place at the wrong time? All of these things factor in. So what I'm trying to point out to you in talking about the facts that it's very easy to hide here and that we really cannot profile traffickers or victims is that it is imperative that we be able to look beneath the surface in order to figure out whether this is a trafficking scenario. So we rely on the community and we rely on law enforcement officers to be able to notice things that do not look right. They may not be able to say that's trafficking, but it doesn't feel right, and then to call on us to look beneath the surface. And then how do we investigate these cases? There are 42 federal human trafficking task forces nationwide. This has been mandated, which I'll talk about in a second, but we have not only federal law enforcement entities such as the FBI, Homeland Security investigation hosted. We have the Labor Department, we have the Internal Revenue Service is our latest partner, but we have almost every law enforcement department or police department in South Florida, including Miami-Dade, which is a big player, City of Miami, Miami Beach, you name it, Hialeah. It's that important, it requires that much. Now that doesn't mean that everybody on those task forces or every police officer understands everything there is to know about trafficking. It means that they have committed at least some resources, sometimes just one or two bodies, to really kind of help with human trafficking. And we do what we can to try to educate them. Now, the federal law is the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, which was enacted in 2000. It mandated the creation of these task forces that where partners would get together to work on these matters. And the TVPA also enacted what we now know as the human trafficking statutes in the code book. Now, I mentioned to you the P's of the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. We know, and I've heard repeatedly, and I agree wholeheartedly, that prosecution is not a way out of this problem. Absolutely not. It's my job to prosecute, but guess what? We know that our first priority is protection of the victim. We have declined to prosecute cases where the victim is unwilling to go forward or does not wish to go forward, or even where we feel it may not be what's best for the victim. That is a very different type of approach. It's not your typical approach for most crimes. It is what we practice here, at least as a human trafficking coordinator for this district federally, that's what we practice here. Prevention, we know, is absolutely critical. So we do hundreds, and I'd say hundreds, of outreach events with law enforcement officers or through law enforcement partners yearly. It is critical that people in the community understand what human trafficking is and be able to report scenarios that we think may need to be researched further. Prosecution, of course, that is still important for us, but it is not our priority. And partnerships has been added, and I've learned through working with my partners that we cannot combat this problem alone. I know more people from non-governmental organizations now than I have in my career, and I'm very proud to say that because we couldn't do our job without them. This is the forced labor statute. I'm not going to belabor it because I have such limited time, but 1589 basically states that whoever knowingly uses force or coercion or threats of force or coercion or threatens abuse of law in order to get labor is in violation of this crime. And then, of course, transporting, harboring, or providing or obtaining someone for this purpose is also a violation. And I just want to talk a little bit about some examples of forced labor cases that we've seen here. Mont Holland, I don't know if many of you remember hearing about that, but was a Haitian immigrant and a middle school teacher down south in Cutler Bay. She came from a successful family in Haiti that had run an orphanage there, and her mother took a young girl from there at the age of 12, where the young girl was working as essentially, a housekeeper at the home there. She was smuggled into the United States as a teenager to work for Mont Holland while she was a teacher here. And at that time, she was forced to work 15 hours a day. When she did not clean well enough, she was beaten. She slept on the floor, ate leftovers, and bathed in the backyard using hose, or sometimes a bucket. She was also rented out to some family in order to help clean for them, and of course the profits went to Mont Holland. She finally escaped in 2005, and that case was prosecuted by the Department of Justice Civil Rights Section in our office, and Holland was actually convicted. Interestingly, the defense in that case was that this was a culture that was misunderstood, that they were giving her an opportunity to succeed here and to do better than she would have done in Haiti. Obviously, the jury disagreed. Then there was the Florida couple who owned a staffing company. They were, the woman was Filipino, Sofia Manuel, and her husband, Alfonso Baldonado. They brought more than 50 Filipinos from the Philippines to work supposedly full-time jobs at country clubs and other such things. As it turns out, once they got here, after they had paid thousands of dollars in recruiting fees, they only had part-time jobs. This is the house that more than 30 of them lived in. It's a 3-bedroom home, and again in West Palm, and they slept anywhere they could find room, including in the garage. They were given very little food, and actually it came to the attention of the police because these victims actually started to go to a Catholic services for food donations. And again, very important to include our faith-based community in community outreach events. So this case, the defendants actually pled. This was a fairly, in my view, low sentence, but it was 78 months and 51 months is what they agreed to plead guilty to. Now those are examples of forced labor here, but we have sex trafficking of children by force, fraud, or coercion, or by force, fraud, or coercion. The important things to highlight here, again, because I have limited time, is just that we do prosecute sex trafficking of individuals who are strictly in Miami or strictly in South Florida. It's important to know that affecting interstate or foreign commerce, basically these days with cell phones and computer usage, is made almost always. So we do not have a minimum number of victims. Every victim or survivor matters. So we have cases involving single victims. The penalties are 15-year mandatory minimum with a maximum term of life if force, fraud, or coercion is used, or if the victim was less than 15 years or 10 years otherwise. But also very important is if it's a minor, we do not need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. Bottom line, if a minor is being prostituted, that is human trafficking. That is a federal offense. It is a state offense, and we will prosecute. Okay, so Boston is a case I want to highlight for you briefly. This is the most recent one. This is a case involving a Jamaican national who was using a fake identity of a real American citizen, and that was Rayshawn Bryant. He traveled the world, and he prostituted women after he would, again, using fraud, make them promises, become the boyfriend, and then he began to beat them, to do serious, sick sexual things to them, to manipulate them, and the amount of physical and mental damage that he did to these 7 women was incredible. This is a victim, by the way, who's laying underneath all that money. He liked to take pictures of his money. He had a Rolls Royce, and he would travel to places, this is just travel with one victim. He liked to prostitute the women in Dubai, other places in the United States, and he would take pictures of the victims everywhere. This case went to trial just recently, and he was very confident. 6 of the women testified, and they did an amazing job. And I will tell you that throughout this entire time, I guess, he took the stand and took the position that this was voluntary, that they were all liars. The jury, after a 3-week trial, took less than an hour to find him guilty. He's going to be sentenced in September. And when I tell you that this man traveled all over the world using different identification and he was never stopped, it is amazing to me that the women he traveled with, who were from all over the world, were constantly stopped, in border crossings. And so we were able to go back and find out who he was traveling with because the women were constantly, I don't want to say being harassed, but were constantly being stopped at the border. So this is the most recent. I don't have time to go through all of the examples, but I do want to say to you that I ask you in closing, what is human trafficking again? And I hope if you take nothing away from it, it is, unfortunately, the horrible suffering that many victims go through, but that these victims, in my experience, are incredibly strong people who are survivors, who become and can live a normal life, but only with the assistance of everyone here, because I can't take them home with me, my investigators can't take them home with me, and the criminal justice system is only a phase. And they have to move on to the next phase, to the future. And we rely on everyone here for that. So, thank you.
Thank you. So we have, once again, a few minutes for questions. Same question right from the back.
Ms. Martinez, hi. I'm an immigration attorney in Miami, and we're dealing a lot with the unaccompanied minors issue. And I wanted to tell you, and I'm also a former journalist, and when you're looking at a lot of the coverage, as you know, they're throwing out the term trafficking. And I think people are confusing smuggling with trafficking, and I wanted you to address that a bit more, particularly the issue of whether, and again, it's not suggesting, I mean, obviously there's a market for it, people paying $5,000 to have their child from Honduras brought to the border, surrendering at the border.
Right.
And I just wanted you to clarify that. I think it's really important.
Certainly. I mean, I think that there are many examples, by the way, where a person is smuggled into the United States, in other words, agrees to come into the United States or any other country, and is then trafficked. In other words, they believe they're coming to another country or location to live a better life, and then they're exploited once they're here. So trafficking typically, is happening after, at least what we're seeing down here in South Florida, after they arrive here. It's when they realize that, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to be forced to work in the fields, or I'm going to be forced to pay this debt back, or I'm going to be forced to engage in commercial sex acts. So I think you just have to remember that smuggling is people agreeing to come here because they believe that they're going to be better off here. And they are compliant. I mean, they agree to that. What happens to them once they're moved in to that next location is typically where you're going to see the trafficking. But that's really important. And I'll also point out, by the way, that it's also very important for me to say that when I say there are massage parlors and businesses, escort services, obviously not everyone at those locations is a victim. We have to look beneath the surface. We have to be able to know. And so we do not, when I give you the numbers, we're not including prostitution numbers. We're not including, it's very important for those of you who are practitioners out there not to inflate numbers that don't count as human trafficking. We're not including alien smuggling charges. Even though we may throw them in, if it applies, if somebody's harboring an alien to help out.
I have a question. You had how many P's you had up there, and one of them was protection. Prevention. And what are we doing doing to advise people not to come up here, that they could be victims of human trafficking. They hear everything, and that's why I thought maybe we could prevent a lot by at least advertising or getting the word out.
Yes, and now that's really important, and I'll tell you with the State Department, for those people that are coming in legally and under visas, they are have been a much more significant partner for us in the last 2 years. And they do work to try, I think they're working to do better, and I think they have to do better to advise people that are coming here on student visas and worker visas of their rights and of the problems with all of these people that are literally looking to prey on them. But there are efforts being made with the consulate offices to do training, and also, with
What about the general public of a certain country that people are coming up from? maybe
this is
Central
why
America or
the
Philippines?
advocacy, everyone here, those people that you work with, immigration attorneys, anyone who has firsthand contact with vulnerable people, anything you can do and anything we can do to help to educate is great. But there are some wonderful materials, by the way. I should have put up the number for the Polaris Project number, the national hotline, which I can put up at the end maybe, and they have some wonderful materials in different languages that you can get there.
Hello, I was wondering if you could explain how it's determined who gets to prosecute, since you mentioned it's both a federal and a state crime. How does it get to you versus the state of Florida?
There are a few things. One, if it's across county lines or state lines, the state can only do what's in their jurisdiction. So Miami is it for Miami. If you have victims in Miami and in Broward, then you would have to have 2 state attorneys' offices to do that. So typically, we try to take cases where there is a cross-line division. But frankly, also the other thing is that we do have different law enforcement officers working the cases. And so sometimes it just depends on who it gets reported to. I do work with the state attorney's office, and I do call. I recently gave them a case that we felt maybe was going to be well suited there. But I can't tell you. They would like, when we've had discussions about is there a divide that we can come up with, and I just can't do it. I can't do it because I care about the victims, and I don't. If a case gets presented to us, we're going to take it if it's a good case to prosecute.
So you recommend reporting to the Polaris Project number versus a Miami?
Well, for us, we respond to the Polaris Project number, and we do work with the locals on that, but the feds receive those directly. And I'll tell you that they are great at reporting and keeping track of all of that information.
We have time for one more question. Hello, Ms. Martinez. My name is Eliana. You had mentioned that you've already prosecuted 100 defendants since 2007, if I got that figure correct?
Right.
You gave us examples of 3 defendants that were all non-U.S. citizens. What about the rest? Are they mostly U.S. citizens? Is it a mixed bag?
It is a mixed bag. I did not get to the examples. I can tell you that a lot of our cases are sex trafficking of minors. They are almost exclusively U.S. citizens who are defendants, so there's a lot to do at the school level, and I know that our state partners are working on that. And even adults, I personally prosecuted and tried a case involving a former police officer and another man who were luring women here under fraudulent pretenses, adults, and then drugging them and filming them engaging in sexual acts and selling it as adult porn. So it's a mixed bag.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to move on.
We're a little low tech today, so bear with us. With that, we're going to move on to our next speaker, and that is Maricel Despausa. Is great. And she is a shareholder with the Carlton Fields Jordan Burt Miami office, where she focuses on white-collar criminal defense, parallel civil litigation in state and federal court, and representation of crime victims.
Good morning. I'm going to discuss medical benefits to victims of human trafficking under the Affordable Care Act, and I'm also going to discuss recent changes to the Florida statutes that affect human trafficking victims. But before I start, and I promised I would do this, I have to thank Gavrila Bratz because she was instrumental into the preparing of my presentation. So thank you, Gavrila. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the Affordable Care Act. Realizing that that human trafficking has become a big problem, when they created the Affordable Care Act, they decided to create a provision where victims of human trafficking can actually get health care benefits under the act. And in order to receive these benefits, the victims must become certified. And when they become certified, they're considered, and this is mostly for refugees that come from other places or immigrants that come from other places and they're brought here illegally and they're here in the United States and they don't have health care, they certify them to become lawfully present in the United States in order to be able to be eligible for health care benefits, like some of the other categories of lawfully present immigrants are Cubans, some Haitians, some people with special visas from Afghanistan, and other people that are classified lawful permanent residents. And in order to become certified, you have to do a few things, and these victims have to do a few things. One thing is that they have to establish that they've suffered from some severe form of human trafficking, such as sex trafficking, slavery, involuntary servitude, transport, harboring across state lines. And once they do that, the person has to submit a bona fide application for a T visa, and or they had to have been granted continued presence for prosecution of traffickers. And what that means is, and I think Ms. Martinez, it was up on her screen, but I don't know if she got to it, but there's special visas for victims that are going to remain in the United States in order to help prosecute their traffickers. And they're going to either testify or they're working with the prosecutor, so they give them special visas. Those visas are called the U visa. And so you get a U visa, so you either can get a T visa or you get this U visa, which allows them to stay in the United States and actually testify or help prosecute, or even if there's thought that there's something that they're going to do is going to be helpful for the prosecution of those traffickers, they get this visa. And once they have the visa, and the U visa also requires proof of some sort of mental or physical harm as a result of the trafficking, and I assume that that's very easy to do. Once the victims establish this and they get their visas, they can become certified. And they can actually go onto the website for the Affordable Care Act and the healthcare marketplace and get healthcare benefits. And sometimes they make them go in person to verify immigration status, I guess to avoid fraud, but it's random how they do that. And the good thing about this is that not only can the victim get benefits, but their spouses, their siblings, any children, their parents can also get healthcare benefits. So I think it was a very good thing. And I'm also going to talk about changes to Florida law that affect human trafficking. And as Ms. Martinez mentioned, Florida is the top 3rd state for human trafficking. And I understand that the reason for that is because of our tourism and hospitality market, because of the labor that we need here, and because there's farms here where they need people to come and work. And apparently that makes us a hotbed for human trafficking. So in realizing that this was a problem and following what other states were doing, Florida decided to enact legislation to combat this problem. And they enacted the Florida Safe Harbor Act. And it became effective January 1st, 2013. The thing about this is, I keep saying human trafficking, but I really, in analyzing the statute, or the act, it really is only for minors that are sexually exploited. They haven't covered the other, I don't believe the law covers has tackled the other aspects of human trafficking, so I'm going to focus on that. And what it basically did, and the key that it did, following what other states had done, is that it stopped prosecuting minors for prostitution. So it prohibits the prosecution of minors for prostitution, which is often how these minors come into contact with law enforcement. And they thought that this was a very good thing because the minors that would come in contact with law enforcement, instead of being arrested, they would be rescued and they would be able to get help. I think that what wasn't contemplated at the time, and they were also hoping the victims would come forward and talk, and what I think what wasn't contemplated at the time, and many experts are saying, is that a lot of these victims don't want to come forward and they don't want to be rescued. because they're scared. This is the first step in combating the problem. So some other things that this Safe Harbor Act did is that it increased penalties for defendants or people exploiting these children. And some of these increased penalties are that if someone is convicted, they actually have to be registered as a sex offender or a sex predator, which I'm shocked that this wasn't done before. I was surprised that was something new that was added by this law. They also increased the penalties for human smuggling and exploitation from a first-degree misdemeanor to a third-degree felony. The other thing that the Safe Harbor Act did was created forfeiture provision when someone is convicted, meaning they can actually take your assets in order to give victims money and help them get benefits in the future and move on with their lives, or forfeiture for whatever other reason they're going to use the money for. It also created safe houses, a provision for safe houses. So when minors are rescued, they can be taken to a home, kind of like a foster home, is what I view it as, where they can be taken care of, brought back to health, given food, given some education, even though we're not sure if that's working yet, but it also required, the safe houses are also required to have staff awake 24 hours a day to monitor the children, which is, these are all good things, but the problem is that, with this, is that, like I said, the minors don't want to go to the safe houses, the minors are running away from the safe houses, the minors are going to the safe houses and recruiting other children to go with their trafficker, and leaving the safe houses together. And the other issue is that the officer cannot take the minor to the safe house without their permission, because it's a due process violation, because they're not arrested. So a lot of the minors are just not going. But hopefully, when Ms. Rundle is here, she'll tell us what we're doing to fix those holes in the law. I will tell you that the other thing that the Safe Harbor Act did is that it created an expungement right for victims of human trafficking. So if you committed crimes and were convicted while you were involved or a victim of human trafficking, such as for prostitution or for theft or whatever you could have been prosecuted for, you have a right to expunge all of that. So you can start your life on a new slate without a criminal history. On July 1st, 2014, some changes to the Safe Harbor Act went into effect in an attempt to fine-tune the law. And most of it was actually, the changes were actually concentrated on being more specific as to what was required under the Act and what was necessary. And some of these changes are that when children are brought in and they find that they're sexually exploited, they have to go through a screening process. And people putting them through this screening process have to be certified and have to be able to know how to do this and trained in these children's causes. And they have to assess them. And some of the things that they have to assess is this child a runaway risk? Is this child a risk of getting children and taking them with the trafficker? Does this child have a substance abuse problem that needs to be treated? Does the child have, what type of trauma or level of trauma does the child have? And what type of interaction has the child had with law enforcement? And the purpose of that is to find the right safe house and right services for each child that's brought in. The amendment to the Safe Harbor Act also required specialized training for case managers and investigators that are working with these children. It requires specialized training for people in the juvenile detention center, for probation officers. It requires, if there's funds left over, it also requires training for law enforcement. But hopefully there will be funds left over. It also requires regular staffing. Now, this is done a lot with kids in DCF care, but now it's going to be done for these kids. I mean, the sexually exploited kids are eventually put into DCF care, but foster children have to go through regular staffing. Now, these children are also going to have to go through regular staffing meetings, which means every single person that provides or service or entity that provides care to that child must meet on a regular basis to coordinate their care. Even a school. If their school has to participate, the person taking care of them at the safe house, in any guardian ad litem, if they're part of some sort of criminal proceeding, someone appointed from the criminal proceeding must be involved in deciding how to coordinate for this care for this child, and hopefully how to coordinate this child's future, so that they can have a successful life, despite their difficulties. DCF has also been instructed, because they're the ones that ultimately take care of the children. They have been instructed that they have to have specific protocols in place and developed per region, depending on what each region of Florida requires to treat these children and what to do with them. And they also created more stringent requirements for safe houses. And some of the things that they're requiring is that they, like I said, they have to be certified. They have to be, before being certified, they have to come out and make sure that they're providing proper security for these children. And I believe that part of the providing the security is to make sure that there's not going to be another issue and that they're not going to be victimized inside the homes, which has been a problem in the past. They have to provide, victim counseling, family counseling. They have to provide behavioral health care. They have to provide treatment and intervention of sexual assault. And they have to educate the child, not only in victimization, but actually going to school, math, science, English, or at least get them to a school. And they have to give them substance abuse treatment if they need it. And the other thing that the amendment did, and this is, I guess, it's creating a statewide council on human trafficking in Florida. And what it does is, it has to be in place by 2015, and the purpose of it is so that everyone in Florida can get together, not everyone, but people on this task force can get together, and decision makers, and decide how to enforce and how better to help human trafficking victims. And some of the people that have to be part of this task force are a Surgeon General, the Secretary of Children and Families, an Attorney General, or a designee, obviously someone from that office. They have to have someone from the Juvenile Justice Department, someone from the Department of Law Enforcement, someone like a sheriff, the state attorney, people from the governor's office, someone from the House of Representatives, or someone from the Senate. So everyone involved that can help this, help the problem, change the laws, provide education, has to come together and meet on a regular basis to figure out how we're gonna fix this problem. And I also wanted to tell you, as I was preparing for my presentation, I came upon one success story of a successful prosecution, and it wasn't here, it was in Polk County, because I know Ms. Fernandez-Rondo is gonna cover the Miami-Dade County prosecutions, but it was May 14th, 2014, and it's a success story, and this was a man that was trafficking a young girl, 15 years old, with a co-defendant, and the young girl was picked up for prostitution. She's 15, and with a co-defendant, and of course, it was under, I believe it was under the Safe Harbor Act, so they couldn't arrest her, but she decided to come forward and testify against her accuser, and the accuser was Mr. Postel, and they were able to arrest him, and he pled guilty to 9 years, which I thought was not enough, but it is 9 years, and he's gonna have to do 9 years of time, and the victim is right now getting care. And that was in May of 2014. So something is happening and something is working. Thank you.
Before we take a few questions about this presentation and also the other presentations, I just want to offer maybe one, or highlight something that I think has come up in so many of the presentations so far, and that is that many of the victims in these cases are afraid of coming forward, are not maybe sure that coming forward is actually going to be better for them than continuing to stay where they are. So especially in light of the gentleman's question before about how do you discourage people from coming here or engaging in these types of activities, I think it's important for us to think about the fact that every problem can be thought of, or at least these problems can at least be thought of as supply problems and also demand problems. If there's a supply problem, usually that is because whatever conditions a person is finding themselves in is a terrible position. Whether that's for political reasons, economic reasons, any number of other reasons, there are situations of exploitation sometimes that the U.S. has some hand in that are creating situations of vulnerability for many people to become victims to begin with. So if we genuinely want to attack the supply side, that might be one way of thinking of how to do it. And as to the other part of it, if we're thinking about demand, we're not just talking about the bad actor facilitators who obviously are not going to be deterred until they get locked up, but we can ask ourselves about the consumers. There are people who are willing to buy children. There are people who are willing to not
ask any questions when they walk into a massage parlor or a brothel. So that may be something else we should be thinking about. Why is it that we have so many consumers willing to be consumers, to not ask questions that they might ask about where their t-shirt came from, but not where the girl in front of them has come from? So with that, I know there's lots of questions. We'll start with you.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Tavares, and I had the pleasure of interning at the Department of Children and Family over the summer. And Ms. Descalzo mentioned the Department of Children and Family. And the fact is that it's really nice on paper, like Dr. Patty, established. The fact is supply and demand is so important. And right now in the Department of Children and Family, I dealt with a few of the divisions in the office downtown, and they don't have a place to put the children. We understand that we have now, and we're talking about nationals, correct? Dr. Patty, we attacked that first. So what do we do with that? The gentleman in the front here had, a great comment about how do we deter the people from other countries, Honduras, specifically now, because it's in the headlights, of them coming over here. The fact is that it's not only a cultural problem, it's the fact that we don't have, our funds aren't spread across in the areas that they need to be spread across. You understand, it's like, the lady in the front, Dr. Martinez, she goes and she, mentioned that, there's a few bodies only addressing this problem. It's huge. And the fact is that as of right now, the Department of Children and Family has no funds, and that's why the children are becoming more and more vulnerable, the ones that we have now, not even addressing the ones that are victims of human trafficking. So how do we deal with that? It puzzles me.
I think it puzzles everyone, and the only way to do that is more community support, more awareness to people, and talk to your legislator. And get more funds for the cause.
If I can add to it, I just want to pull that number up here too, because it kind of relates to your question, and that the Polaris Project number will provide for them. Let's say somebody wants to get calls and doesn't want it reported to police, but they need services. Polaris Project will just refer them to the local providers, and so that's a great thing, right? Because and they won't even contact law enforcement or investigators, if the victim doesn't want that. There are entities out there. It is very difficult. You're right. It's a concerted effort. We have had a ton of people who have started to do new things that are nonprofit. We find housing for our minors one way or the other. And it's not always DCF, because we have kids that are at home that are problematic. And we have a lot of, the Hope House is a place that we work with a lot in West Palm Beach, and I'll tell you, the one good thing about when you get the teens involved is that the few resources that are out there, we will work to get them. But there's certainly a lot more work, like you said, to be done.
Thank you. Sure. One quick comment to address the funding and then a question for Marisol. As early as July 17th, the Department of Justice has requested $295 million in aid to trickle down to the state level. So I'm not sure what percentage, but eventually when it comes down the pipeline, that's a resource. I'm curious about certifying a victim as a victim of trafficking. Does that require prosecutorial cooperation?
Not for the T visa, just for the U visa. For the U visa, I believe you do have to cooperate, or at least you have to have some level of cooperation with law enforcement, even if it's not with an actual Department of Justice or Florida State prosecutor. But I think the T visa is not in that.
I think actually, right, technically, there is a reasonable effort that has to be made for them to cooperate with law enforcement. It doesn't mean that the case has to be prosecuted, by the way. And we do, at least in South Florida, and it's going to vary depending on where you are, we do provide or support visas, T visas, and U visas for victims who are not willing to, or who are not going to have their cases prosecuted. Because they're cooperative in other ways and telling us the story anyway, and so just so you know. Even for the T visa, you do need a little bit of.
So I actually have a little bit of a comment on the Safe Harbor Act, and in relation, he's not here anymore, but in relation to the way the passage of laws can affect change. So when we researched and lobbied and basically fought for 3 years to get this act passed, it was very much in response to, and this is 2012 you're talking, right? 2008 to 2012. 12 years after the TVPRA, and we're still fighting law enforcement about prosecuting minors that they're being caught. And really, up until that act passed, I mean, FDLE fought us tooth and nail in the governor's committee and in the legislative committees. And people in the northern part of the state thought, well, this is a Miami problem. This doesn't affect us. So when you talk about how can the passage of laws affect, changing the culture, and this is an example, because now you're having successful prosecution and then rehabilitation. As far as the contemplating that the girls didn't want to go forward, that very much speaks to the issue. I mean, they knew full well. The average girl runs away 7 times. They don't want to come forward. When you talk to them, they want to know, what do you have to offer me? When we actually spoke to treatment providers nationwide, the one common thing that everybody said, girls will run away and they will come back to get educated. They will come back to go to school. That was the one thread that we heard. But the rest of it really speaks to food security, physical security. I mean, they're weighing their options. Where am I going to get my next meal if I come from go with you? Right now, this guy's, he's giving me maybe 2 Big Macs a day, but it's, at least I've got something. And that's, I think that it was definitely contemplated, but, you can only work with what you have. The main thing was changing the viewpoint within law enforcement. And it was particularly frustrating because FDLE, who supposedly represents Florida law enforcement, is disregarding the testimony from their gang unit detectives and their missing persons detectives, complete disregard for what they are in testifying, saying that they need resources because we need to send a message to these girls that we don't approve the activities that they're engaged in. And it was shocking. You're talking 14 years after the TVPRA.
Thank you for that perspective, because it's interesting to hear what it was like at the inception and the battle that you fought it's easier to see it from the outside.
From the outside,
Of course,
yeah.
so I appreciate that. I can see how I'm sure it's a problem. You're doing the best with what you can, right?
If I may only have your attention for, here at St. Thomas Human Trafficking Academy, we had come up with 5 training videos, one of them due to the Safe Harbor Act. So they are really short, for those of you who want to get like a quick glance at the law, and maybe you didn't remember everything that was said earlier. Go to humantraffickingacademy.org, and then right on top you have training videos, and see if any of them interest you. And they are not lengthy, about 10 minutes, 8 minutes or so.
Thank you for that. I know that there are more questions, but in the interest of time, to keep us on schedule, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, and that is Patrick Truman, who is the president and CEO of Morality Media and the former chief of Child Exploitation and Obscenity Section in the U.S. Department of Justice, where he supervised the prosecution of child sex crimes, child pornography, and obscenity.
Thank you very much. Just in response quickly to your comment about the reluctance of law enforcement, etc. My first anti-trafficking effort was when I was with the Justice Department, prosecuting child sex abuse and adult pornography, child pornography. And we had a fellow from New York come to talk about the child prostitution in New York City. Now, this is well prior to the TVPA. And I went on an investigation. 2 a.m. in the morning, the Meat Market District, 2-block area, the streets are lined with child and adult prostitutes, many child prostitutes. And it's a traffic jam to get in there. One person after another having sex with these girls, pulling them into the car, and then getting out, the next car pulls out. We could not get the FBI to put an agent on that case. And we had to go to the Attorney General of the United States at the time, this is 1990, to get any sympathy at all. And all I'd say is that law enforcement needs to be trained just like everybody else. Well, that's not the subject of my talk. I have a provocative talk, perhaps, but I want to begin with the yet to be published research by Dr. Marianne Layton. This will come out soon. She's the director of the University of Pennsylvania Sexual Trauma and Psychopathology Program. She's got extensive research, part of which shows that 25% of college-aged males, aged 19 to 22, at a large East Coast university, which she asked me not to mention, the researchers are, 25% in a survey said they had either gone to a prostitute or planned to go soon. That startling statistic tells me why sex trafficking is flourishing in America today and will be for decades to come. Monto and McCrae in their research did a comparison of men who were high-frequency users of prostituted women to those who were low-frequency users. And they found that those who were high-frequency users of pornography also were the ones highly likely and using prostituted women. Other studies have found similar results. And what we know is that where there is prostitution, there is sex trafficking. So it seems that our nation's youth are unwittingly embracing sex trafficking. Or perhaps it's not so unwittingly. If the students were further surveyed on whether it would make a difference to them, whether the person they're seeking sex with was a prostituted woman or a sexually trafficked woman, most all would say yes. But what we know about those who visit prostituted women is that they don't care. That 25% figure, combined with research studies on the links between pornography and trafficking, also tells me that we must make radical changes in the way we fight trafficking. For the most part, anti-trafficking efforts focus on the victim and not on demand for the victim. I'm not criticizing victim-centered efforts. I've been involved in many. Indeed, most are praiseworthy. However, there's little done on the demand side of the equation, and we owe it to the victims of trafficking to destroy demand. Why are those college males so willing to visit a prostituted woman? Prostitution is still a taboo in today's society. At a time when sex trafficking and prostitution is given such heightened scrutiny, what has caused the breakdown in the inhibitions of a quarter of the male population of a top university? The answer lies in our willingness to accept sexual exploitation. We are, as a society, conflicted about sexual exploitation. Generally, we oppose the ultimate in sexual exploitation, the sexual slavery by traffickers, especially the trafficking of children. But in our society, we lionize those who make a living off the sexual exploitation of women and girls. The media and Hollywood have made heroes of Playboy's Hugh Hefner, hustlers Larry Flint, and Bob Guccione, the founder of Penthouse magazine, the original kings of American pornography. These men made pornography acceptable to the masses, and by doing so made sexual exploitation acceptable as well. Yet it was Flint who put a naked woman fed into a meat grinder on the cover of his magazine, and that seems perfectly to symbolize his attitude toward the women depicted in Hustler. It was also Flint who featured the comic Chester the Molester in his magazine, the premise of which was that men could have sex with prepubescent girls. It was Guccione who put 15-year-old Tracy Lords as the centerfold in Penthouse, helping to launch her on her child pornography career. She did 15 hardcore porn films for the porn industry before she did 100 porn films for the mainstream porn industry before she turned 18 years of age. And it was Hefner who gave pornography an air of respectability by mixing celebrity interviews with porn so that generations of men could claim they just look at pornography, at Playboy, for the articles. We did not check these predators in their decades of exploitation, and now we are left with the consequences Sex trafficking is one of them. These men sold pornography to the American public as an emblem of freedom. And yet, as we've seen in the age of the human trafficker, it is an agent of destruction, killing consciences of consumers and providing materials for traffickers to train victims. Yet the anti-trafficking movement seems reluctant to target pornography in its effort. Federal agencies charged with anti-trafficking training rarely mention pornography as a contributing factor to the problem. Scholar Catherine McKinnon says that consuming pornography is an experience in bought sex. And thus it creates a hunger, she says, to continue to purchase and objectify and act out what is seen. She says that pornography is advertising for trafficking, not just in general, but in the sense that traffickers and pimps use pornographic images of victims as specific advertising for their products. You look at Craigslist and the other Backpage and these others, how are they advertising the prostituted and trafficked women? With pornography, of course. Dr. Janice Raymond writes that the effect that pornography has on Johns. Men want to enact the fantasies, the transgressions, and ultimately the degradation and violence of pornography with live women, and believe that the place to do it is in prostitution. I've confirmed Dr. Raymond's words by talking to many prostituted women who have told me that Johns bring porn to the sessions to show the prostituted women specifically what they want to act out. Much of what men see in porn would not be performed by a wife or a loved one, so they must go to a woman who cannot say no. According to Shared Hope International's report on the demand for sex trafficking, pornography is the primary gateway to the purchase of humans for commercial sex. Even the current Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, testified before the U.S. House Judiciary Committee in 2011 that pornography is contributing to sex trafficking. The effect of our pornified culture on boys is profound. It is causing boys to grow up with a sense of sexual entitlement for the girls. Pornography trains them to believe that they have a right to exploit because females are mere sex objects, and more than that, they enjoy the role. Pornography, which is almost entirely composed of depictions of female sexual exploitation for the pleasure of men, fosters this cultural development in a way that no other cultural factor can compare. And keep in mind that pornography is the sex education of the majority of our youth today. The overwhelming weight of peer-reviewed studies over the last 40 years demonstrates how pornography breaks down inhibitions, leading to aberrant sex acts, unwelcome sexual acts, sexual violence, prostitution, and sex with trafficked victims. The research indicates that the consumers of pornography have a higher likelihood of believing that a rape victim enjoyed the rape, believing that women suffered less from rape, believing a rape victim experienced pleasure and, quote unquote, got what she wanted, and a higher likelihood of self-reported acts of rape. What is sex trafficking, if not rape? The research also indicated that men gain an acceptance of violence against women and more likelihood of creating more sexually violent fantasies to get aroused. The research and common sense tell us that porn is training material for sex trafficking. It becomes a small step for many to go from pornography to sex with prostituted girls or women, or to a trafficked girl or women. To fully understand this, we need to understand today's porn. What is it that boys see watching pornography that causes such profound changes in their sexual template? What is seen in a search of Google for the term porn? Well, it's an endless harem of sexually perverse images, and much of it depicts violence against women. Violence is central to pornography. Dr. Anna Bridges, in her study, found that 88% of the scenes in the 100 most popular porn movies depicted verbal or physical violence, and it is violence against women. The violence in porn is unique to movie entertainment in that it is actual violence. It is different from Hollywood violence, which is fake. In porn, the slapping, the fist beatings, the choking, gagging, sexual attacks by multiple men not only look real, they are real. And the audience understands and enjoys this authenticity. One of the most popular porn stars followed by children and adults today is Belle Knox. She is the Duke University student working her way through college by doing porn, which she says is the most empowering experience of her 18-year-old life. Must not have lived much. Former porn star and anti-pornography activist Shelley Lubin released a YouTube sanitized version of one of Belle Knox's popular porn films so that the general public could see what happens to the empowered women in pornography. The video begins with a scene of Knox co-star grabbing her by the throat with his hands and choking her until her eyes bug out of her head, and then he throws her down, slapping her and beating her on the floor until she begs for mercy, begs him to stop. Can we possibly think that a boy seeing such depictions will not be negatively affected? But what about a man? This is what kids today understand is adult entertainment. The acts are typical of porn today. Predatory men acting as sexual psychopaths attacking women. We must ask the question, what are the long-term consequences on civil society of a growing population of boys and men who enjoy watching sex mixed with violence against women? In fact, enjoying it so much that they will spend hours a day in such activity. We see one consequence in the flourishing of sex trafficking. Boys are not born Johns. That is the result of cultural training. But I worry about the effect of our pornified culture on girls as well. I believe that we are training girls to accept sexual exploitation. Ernie Allen, until recently the president of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, explains what is happening in the great rise of child prostitution throughout the world. He says increasingly our society sexualizes children at younger and younger ages, making sexual activity involving kids seem normal. Thus we encounter child victims who almost expect to be sexually exploited. An American Psychological Association Taskforce in 2007 reported, the report found that girls are changing their self-image as a result of sexualized media and mass marketing. The constant stream of images of sexualized models and Hollywood actresses in advertisings is profoundly altering their self-image, the report found. Girls see that it is not enough to be a straight-A student or a good athlete, for example. If they are not sexy, they do not see themselves as measuring up in today's society. The task force called this phenomenon sexual self-objectification and warned of its consequences. What this study represents is an acceptance by girls of the sexually exploited role set out for them and in fact demanded of them by our current culture. Dr. Sharon Lamb, a member of the task force, says that because girls get rewarded quickly for being sexy, they don't invest in other rewarding activities that may take more time to perfect, such as music and art. We are dumbing down girls. Lamb says that we are developing two types of girls, one of the boys and one for the boys. Sociologist Dr. Gail Dine says that a girl today must be sexually active or be invisible. That's the choice. And she asked, what 14-year-old girl wants to be invisible? The change in self-image is leading many girls to porn, and we can see this in the great numbers of girls willing to engage in sexting and in the increasing numbers of girls getting into the porn industry. A porn studio producer said recently that girls are coming to the porn set porn ready. He said, we used to have to train them to do porn, but the culture does that for us today. If we are to stop sex trafficking, we must oppose all sexual exploitation and recreate a culture that honors the dignity of the individual person, the whole person, not just a few body parts. Pornography must be opposed. Our society must gain an intolerance for those who promote or consume pornography in the same way we gained an intolerance for smoking. Federal and state laws prohibiting the distribution of pornography, which is a term meaning, federal and state laws prohibiting the distribution of hardcore pornography, which is referred to as obscene pornography under federal law, must be vigorously enforced. And enforcement of such laws is constitutional and quite American. Miller versus California in 1973 is the seminal case setting forth the constitutionality of laws prohibiting distribution of hardcore pornography. The Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act should also be used against pornographers, as has been suggested by many lawyers who understand the law and the sexual coercion that takes place in the mainstream pornography industry. 45 states have sound laws prohibiting distribution of obscene or hardcore material. And federal law is even more extensive. Few people understand that federal law today prohibits the distribution of hardcore pornography on the internet, yet it's all over the internet. It prohibits the distribution of hardcore pornography on cable or satellite television, yet all your mainstream providers provide illegal hardcore pornography. It prohibits the distribution of hardcore pornography on your hotel-motel TV, and yet how many hotel chains don't have that material? It prohibits the distribution of hardcore pornography being sent through the mail. And it even prohibits one from being in the retail distribution of hardcore pornography. These laws have all been upheld and are good today, and yet they're not enforced, not by the federal government, not by the states. I served as the U.S. Department of Justice Chief Law Enforcement Officer enforcing these laws, and what you find out in jury trials is that juries almost always, with rare exceptions, will say that this material doesn't represent their community values, and they will convict. We must, perhaps it is the collective failure to understand the underpinnings of the trafficking culture that prevents our vigorous enforcement of federal obscenity laws. We must bear in mind the words of the United States Supreme Court in Paris Adult Theater versus Slayton in the 1973 case. Quote, the sum of experience affords an ample basis for legislatures to conclude that a sensitive key relationship of human existence, central to family life, community welfare, and the development of human personality can be debased and distorted by crass commercial exploitation of sex. The states and Congress have the power to make morally neutral judgment that the public exhibition of obscene material or commerce in such material has a tendency to injure the community as a whole, to endanger the public safety, or to jeopardize, in Mr. Chief Justice Warren's words, the state's right to maintain a decent society. Have we forfeited that right? I think not. And if we are to properly serve the victims of trafficking, we must do all we can to destroy the demand for trafficking. I want to conclude by saying that by creating a culture of sexual exploitation, we have set the banquet table for the sex trafficker. And now we complain that he enjoys the repast. And I want to leave you with a few words from Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe about the slave trader, which applies well to today's slave trader. Quote, "He is a shocking creature, isn't he, this trader? So unfeeling. They are universally despised, never received into decent society. But who, sir, makes the trader? Who is most to blame? The enlightened, cultivated, intelligent man who supports the system of which the trader is the inevitable result, or the poor trader himself. In what are you better than he? Are you educated and he ignorant? You high and he low? You refined and he coarse? You talented and he simple? In the day of future judgment, these very considerations may make it more tolerable for him than for you." Thank you very much. I have a brochure on the links between pornography and trafficking, and here's a peer-reviewed article in the Johns Hopkins Journal for Human Rights and Civil Society on the link between pornography and trafficking, if you're interested. They're over. Thank you.
Questions from the audience? Presentation. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
You spoke about the importance of men with human trafficking and the human trafficking culture. Not long time ago, I had the opportunity to listen to a gentleman who is the executive director for an organization called Men Can Stop Rape.
Men can stop.
Can Stop Rape. And what they do is they educate children in middle school, high school, and universities too. What other coordinator efforts do you see with other groups to affect the human trafficking culture?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you're asking. What other groups are trying to
Yes.
change the culture?
Exactly.
Well, this was my concern. There are a lot of good trafficking groups out there, and there's a lot of teaching about it. We've been meeting with the Department of Defense and the Department of Health and Human Services, and a light went on. I mean, the head of trafficking at the Department of Defense said, "Gee, we never thought of including pornography." Every soldier, and every person in the military, and every civilian contracted by the military is trained in human trafficking. But yet pornography is sold on every base, it's available on every base. Just in the last year, pressure from the military got it out of a couple of them. But so we're doing, I think, a good job on training, but not a complete job. And that's my point. You have to look at the demand side of it. Why does a man, why does a college student, 25% of them at university, think that they can go to a prostitute and not think whether that's a traffic woman? Many of those kids are having sex with traffic women. But I think that it's important that we go back to the beginning and look at the culture we're building. Look at the tolerance we have for those who are the sexual exploiters. When you go into a grocery store and they have, Playboy magazine or these magazines, and your kids see that, and you say nothing about it, what's in the mind? And when you go into Barnes and Noble, they bring pornography to your community. You have 20 porn magazines. Barnes and Noble has a book that we tried to prosecute as child pornography. They got a whole collection of child prepubescent, explicit pornography with children. That's a whole other story. But they bring it to your community and people don't say anything. So all I'm saying is that we have to have an intolerance for sexual exploitation, but not just for trafficking, for all sexual exploitation, or we won't change it.
Thank you.
Mr. Truman,
Yeah.
I want to commend you for your presentation. Spectacular. I also thought that maybe I don't see much of the private sector involved in this discussion. I had a question for you, Mr. Martinez. Thank you for all you do. Thank you to all of you, obviously. But I'm sure emotionally it must be a difficult job to be dealing with your limited, power on changing the outcome for some of those victims. And I saw between the list of the people that were places where you can find victims, I didn't see anything with agricultural fields here in South Florida, Tampa, Homestead. I mean, is there a police enforcement
enforcement in those areas? Do they visit those farms? And I'm not even saying that, you should go there and stop what's going on, but at least create more human conditions for these people there.
Absolutely.
And you said that one of your partners is the IRS, so maybe a good idea is to involve the private sector. Maybe a good idea is to offer a tax break. Maybe a good idea is to definitely punish the enabler, the people that are buying pornography, people that are, this community effort. And this, I commend you for this workshop because this brings home to all of us.
Thank you so much. And let me just say that agricultural is important. Sorry. It is extremely important. Oh, that's right. There you go. And it is critical to have the private sector involved. And I will tell you, it's very difficult to police agriculture because of the private farms and to get on. But there's been a lot of movement in Florida in the right direction. But it's difficult as law enforcement for us to get enough to look beneath the surface. So we really need help of others. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on the last thing that you were talking about, how it's such a cultural thing. And I think that's so true because you see the difference even in like 5 years. You see pictures that girls post on their Facebook and on their Instagram. You see the difference from even like 2008 to now, and it's just completely like sexualized. So I think that besides tackling how the boys, like the boys are into all that kind of stuff, and it's a result of like how we allow it to happen. But I also think that a big problem is that girls don't know how worthy they are, in a sense.
Yes.
Because in our schools, since boys are into all of this, what's a girl gonna do? A girl's gonna try to please all boys. So I think a good idea would be how in our schools we have, for example, we get presentations on drug abuse and all those things, but we never hear this kind of stuff because it's kind of like taboo and like, y'all think it's cool and it's something you don't want to talk about. But I think that it would be important, I don't know if there are any programs or anything, to actually go to the schools, because it could be a problem with our own people, like I said, people who are coming from other countries, where it's definitely worse and more obvious, but it's a problem here too, and I think it's just getting worse and worse all the time.
There is a group called Fight the New Drug that does high school assemblies all around the country. It's just one group teaching about this, and they do a phenomenal job and changes a lot of minds. But what's happened in our society, we're training people to say, I'm opposed to trafficking. They say it, but that's all they do. And when they turn 18, some of these kids, where do they go to celebrate? At the strip club. There isn't a strip club in America that doesn't have prostitution. As I said in my presentation, where there's prostitution, there's trafficking. So you can't teach these kids that all this sexual exploitation, strip clubs, all this is okay, just don't be involved in trafficking. It doesn't work.
We're talking about attacking the demand side. Prostitution is, they say, the oldest profession. So it's been around forever. So yes, there is a correlation between pornography and that. But I know that there was a doctor who said that, I'm not sure if she's a doctor, but someone that is writing a publication on this. Did she explore further the details behind the prostitution and the true demand triggers on that, other than pornography?
Dr. Marianne Layton has got a very extensive bibliography. You can look it up. She's researched quite a bit on the issue of prostitution and pornography, and quite well known in the area of pornography because of what she's written about it, and speaks all over the country. But there's a number of studies, and she has a compilation of studies, which you can find on one of our websites called pornharmsresearch.com, pornharmsresearch.com, and look up the name Layton, L-A-Y-D-E-N, and you'll see she's got maybe about 100 different research sites, peer-reviewed research articles combined into one compilation that she has.
So again, I know that there are more questions, but we are running just a tiny bit behind schedule. schedule, and our speaker, the next speaker, has just arrived. And so I'm very pleased to be able to introduce her briefly. This is for State Attorney Catherine Fernandez-Rundle. After concluding her legal studies in England at the University of Cambridge, Ms. Rundle became a prosecutor with the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. And after several promotions through different divisions within that office, she became legal counsel to the Dade County Grand Jury, serving longer than any previous counsel. In 1993, she was appointed and subsequently reelected 6 times to serve as state attorney. And by doing so, she became the first female Hispanic state attorney in the state of Florida. Please welcome Ms. Fernandez.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I guess I was told I was right on time, so those are good words to hear. But the gate was actually closed. They didn't want to let me in. What do you think? I'm really so glad to be here, and I want to thank the university so much for hosting this very, very important, conference. And I want to thank Michelle Vargas and bienvenidos to the Hispanic National Bar. And how many of you are with the bar, and how many are law students? Okay, great, excellent. And I want to say hello to this distinguished panel. My regards to our U.S. Attorney, Willie Ferrer. I'm sure you've already heard from Barbara. It's great to see you. I wanted to introduce over there on the left-hand side, that is Emiliano Tamayo. And I have to tell you, he's a retired city manager police officer, but he then joined our human trafficking unit. And I can tell you, the work that he does day in and day out, at night with these, and early morning hours with these victims is just phenomenal. So you don't know him, but if you would, thank him with a nice round of applause. So, okay, let me just share with you some of my observations and some of the things that I've learned. I often tell everyone that when I first started hearing about human trafficking, that I had a misperception. I thought what many others thought, I think, and that is that you conjured up a vision of children in cargo containers being shipped from the Philippines and through trains and then through Central South America. And that was kind of what conjured up in my mind, and I still think people see it that way. And at the same time, Florida was ranked to be, we're always number 1, number 2, Florida. We're just, what can I tell you? But in terms of human trafficking, it was really heartbreaking to learn that we ranked 2nd or 3rd in the United States for the number of human trafficking victims. And Barbara will know, because we kind of started this journey together. She was a little ahead of us on it. But when we started, so when I got with my staff and everybody, I said, well, where are these victims? And we didn't have any victims that we could identify as victims. And that began our learning journey. And we realized we had a lot of work to do to really sort of recognize what this is, what it looks like, how do we find them, what do we do with them when we find them, what kind of laws do we have, and so on and so forth. So I want to also share with you, because I know most of you are into the business law, I gather. This does creep into the area of business. So separate apart from getting into the hospitality areas, the real estate areas, let me also tell you that it is in and of itself an industry. It is guesstimated at any one time, and I apologize if some of the other speakers already said these numbers, but it is estimated that this is a $32 billion,
33.6 trillion.
Okay, there you go. I haven't read that one. That definitely trumps my number, that's for sure.
UN, the latest UN, the private sector invested, and when they caught in Sicily 4 leaders 6 months ago, they caught $1.5 billion account, and blueprints countries they're going to take. This year find out $33.6 billion.
So we definitely need to get with you afterwards, right? Get some of this very helpful information. The numbers I have are that there's at any one given time 2.5 million of these victims that are caught up in this modern day slavery. And the thing that I really learned is that if you try to identify who the victims are, and I'm really looking at local victims, Because one of the things I discovered was it wasn't so much the global trade, it was really girls, mostly girls. 75% of all our victims are girls. There's that 25% of the young boys, but they're girls in our neighborhoods. There really are girls right here in our community. And so what we did was we put together a task force so we could start looking at these cases differently. And what our office did was we started with cases of prostitution. So we have a juvenile division, so we looked at the cases coming in on prostitution. And we turned our thinking around and we said, you know what? These are probably victims. So instead of prosecuting them, we brought them in and looked at them as victims. We started there. Then we went into the adult system. Said, okay, by the way, here in Florida, juvenile is cut off at the age of 18. Other areas it's 16. So then we went into the adult system and we said, okay, what about women? And it could be a 19-year-old, it could be an 18-year-old for that matter, coming in on charges of prostitution. We started to look at that population. We then looked at our Johns. So we just can't be working, we've got to work on the demand side of things as well. So we toughened up our policies internally on the Johns. Then what we did was we got lawyers, set aside wonderful prosecutors that understood, that started to learn the complexities of these victims. Are very complex. And the next thing we did was we looked at investigators, police, because you have to get them. So we started training the police on what to look for when you see something on the street. Because all it is looking at something with a different set of glasses. So with that kind of team in place that was developing expertise, we looked at our laws. We needed some legislation. We needed stronger laws. We didn't have them in Florida. So I partnered up with our Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who was a tremendous asset to me in Tallahassee. We got together with our state legislators. We copycatted some of the tools that the federal government had, its federal statutes, and we have over the years changed it. We've been back many times. I'll tell you about some of those in a minute. And what we created, I think, was the most important feature was what the federal government had we didn't have. They wanted us to prove, if you can imagine this, that a 13 or 14-year-old was being forced, coerced, or lured with fraud into the business. Now, the other thing we learned is that the majority of these victims start being victimized at the age of 13. So I just want you to think for a minute. You have a niece, yourself, a daughter, a granddaughter. Do you know what 13 looks like? It's really almost infantile. They barely have made the pubescent level. So if you think about that, we said, what do you mean? Of course she was forced into this slavery. But the law needed to be changed. And so we did what the federal statute allowed, which was we do not have to prove that anymore. That was a very important piece of legislation, especially when I talked to you a little bit about the trauma bonding complexities for these victims. The other thing we did was we made the population of victims in our state statute victims, just like sexual assault victims. They're going to be entitled now to victims' compensation, which includes relocation. There was not a specialized area in the law for them. The other thing we did was we gave them some privacy protections. Just like you would a victim of sexual assault, we do not have to reveal their identities either. And then I want to tell you some other pieces of legislation that we passed came actually from cases that we have. Let me tell you, remember I told you about 2.5 years ago, we didn't have any cases? Today, we have 236 filed criminal cases and 100 pending investigations. That's how far we've come in just 2.5 years. So we've got the statutes in place, we've got the experts in place, we have our partners in place, we partner very well in our community, which is a very important feature. And then, as we worked through the cases, we realized we really needed to focus all of our human and health services on the victims. They're very complicated victims, obviously so. The statistics say that for every one of these victims, they're being raped 5 to 15 times a day, 5 days a week. Chilling, isn't it? So you can just imagine the symptomology of these victims and how complex it is. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And I want to talk about the control feature. Some of the statutes that we got in place dealt with, I'll give you an example. How many of you live in Miami? Okay, then you probably know this case. Al Garcia. Hi Al, it's so good to see you.
Great to see you.
We used to work together just a little time ago, right?
It was only 5 years ago, right?
We had a terrible case. It involved a 13-year-old again. And she kept wanting to get out of this modern day slavery, and she couldn't escape, despite all her best efforts. And finally one day she took to the streets and she just broke loose out of that hotel room. And she went on the streets. The pimp caught up with her and said, really? Okay, that's it. He took her to a tattoo shop. And those of you that live here may have seen it. It's on front page. And he took her in and had branded, that's what he called her, branding, I'm branding you mine. And he tattooed across her eyelids all of his identifying features. Can you imagine that? That victim, we got her for a little while and she ran away and she came back, and I'm going to tell you that. So, what do we do about that? We ran to Tallahassee while we're working with that case and trying to hang on to her, try to rescue her and build a criminal case at the same time, following the laws and due process. We went to Tallahassee and we said, you know what? This needs to be a very serious felony. And we got it. And that's another piece of legislation we just got in the 214 legislature. Another one. Since all of you are local, or most of you are, I know we have listeners out there that aren't, but we had another case, unfortunately in Miami, where a 13-year-old, again, and I'm going to use this as an example because she really, in so many ways, describes what happens to these young people. Most of them are runaways. They, whatever reason, they have a problem at home. It could be a whole bunch of reasons. They're neglected, they're being abused at home, or they're just having a fight. Sometimes mom's boyfriend is doing inappropriate things in the house. Sometimes these predators target women that have pubescent children. That's a whole other category of offenses. But they're very, very clever, these predators, and very dangerous, and they do unspeakable things. They look for girls that are runaways, and that's what happened in this case and many others. She's 13 years old. She runs away from home. She's got very little money. Most 13-year-olds don't have a lot of money. She goes to a very cheap hotel, stays there a night or two, and guess who's waiting for her? All the predators. They all know. They know exactly what their victim looks like. They drag her in and bring a woman in, and I hate to tell you, there are a lot of women. They usually start out themselves as victims in the slavery trade, and then to just find some freedom and salvation, they begin working for the pimp, and they start recruiting the girls. So this couple finds her, says, why don't you come to our house? They take her to this home, so now this 13-year-old is thinking, okay, I can't afford a hotel room anymore, I'm in a safe place, I'm with a woman. The next thing you know, he starts bringing the Johns in after they buy her clothes, and they get her mani-pedi, gentlemen, you know what that is, right? They just make her feel good for a very short period of time. That's part of the war. Then the next thing that happens, they start bringing the Johns in, and she's like fighting with them, I'm not doing this. She's just hysterical, but she has no ability to do anything about it. She then finally puts her foot down, and they say, really, you're not going to do this anymore? Then you know what you're going to do? We're going to take you to a strip club, and you're going to dance, and this is how you're going to dance, and these are the clothes you're going to wear. They took this 13-year-old to they sometimes call them adult theaters, strip clubs. They take her to this strip club, and they make her dance, and they make her strip. And I want you to imagine this. Everyone in that room, the operators, the owners, the bartenders, the other women that are working there, the managers, the bouncers, you trying to tell me they don't know what a 13-year-old looks like? Finally, somebody rescued, called 911, and we were able to bring her into the fold, and of course now we have that whole case pending. But what we did was, we went again to the legislature last year, along with the branding and the tattoos, and we said, you know what, we need an affirmative, strong law that says, no, you just can't turn a blind eye and say, I didn't know, and you can't say you hired an independent contractor. You have an affirmative responsibility as a business owner to make sure that the people that are coming in, whether it's you or it is your independent contractors or the bouncers, whoever you have in place, you cannot eliminate that responsibility. It's in the law now. And they have to document it, and they have to maintain that documentation for all to see. So I give you those as some examples because Michelle wanted me to talk a little bit about the law, but this is how I've been able to, and I'm sure all of you out there have been able to, you use your cases and you go back to Tallahassee and you build your laws as you need them. Let me tell you the other thing we needed to do on the victim services side. I told you, and I know you know this, I know that's why we're having this conference, the complexities for these young women is huge. It's a trauma bond and symptomology that many of us and many of our social service providers just weren't prepared for. So we looked all over the country. We went to New York, we went to Israel actually, we went to, even in Sarasota, has a very good team. In Sarasota, they do very good work here in Florida. And just to try to figure out how do you build a network for these victims. Because you have to build a prosecution that we call is not victim-based. And I'm sure most of you know, most of our cases rely on the victim. Witnesses and victims, right? I was robbed, this is the man that did it, he pointed a gun at me, and so on and so forth. And usually they're very willing to come forward. These victims are very different. For a start, we've learned through neuroscience. We had to really study this. We actually brought a neuroscientist in from New York that could work with my lawyers and our team and our victim witness counselors. And here's what happens. If you've ever looked at an immature mind, which means up to the age of 24 or 25, you can look at it. I don't know, have any of you seen that ever? Okay, it's very interesting. And I'm not an expert in this, I'm just trying to learn and absorb it. But if you look at the brain, you can actually see holes, if you like. They're usually in bright yellow. They do a sign, they do a figure of a brain. And you can compare that to a full matured brain, which usually starts around 24, 25. So you take a young brain to begin with, okay? So they're already not able to do a lot of self-control because the last part of it is the frontal lobe that develops. And then you add trauma on top of that. And you can see the actual cuts of a brain of someone who's been traumatized. And so layered upon the already immature brain is this another level of deficits, and the yellow gets bigger and bigger. So what does that tell you? That tells you that we're dealing with a very, very traumatized, complex symptomology for this victim. It plays out in different ways. If you interview her sometimes, she's chronologically disoriented. And I bet Tamayo's run into this. He's been, in fact, he's working on a case that involves a ring between Las Vegas, Georgia, and Miami.
New Jersey, Texas, and New Mexico.
And he's been working on this a long time. In fact, one of the victims, they actually left one of the victims in the middle of the street till he died. She'd been hit by a car. And Tamaya's been sort of going around the country trying to find the evidence we need. But the point is, if you sit down to interview them, they're chronologically, and you know how lawyers are, and defense lawyers, we're all doing our job, but we expect things in sort of a chronological order. But they're unable to really do that the way that you and I would think they should be able to. So we've had to learn how to work with our victim witness counselors and specialists on how they have to work with them. The other thing is, we have a saying in the office, if the girl won't tell you, her cell phone will. So what we have done, you all knew exactly what I meant by that, right? We have, again, while we work on rescuing the victim and making her whole again, the case proceeds. And we have all kinds of time constraints in Florida, as most of you know. So what we have done is we've married the expertise of a cyber crimes unit. Some years ago, I realized I needed a cyber crimes unit because most of the crime for the future is going to be through technology. And it has been a wonderful resource for my human trafficking division. Because now we know what orders we need, we know what we need technologically, we get her cell sites, we get his, we get her text messages. We actually had a case, I think a month ago, one of our lawyers, she's amazing, she went to court without the victim, and the defendant said, no, I'm her boyfriend. And we said, really? And my lawyer was able to take and read into evidence all of the messages of coercion, force, threats. Believe me, they use it all. They beat people into compliance. They drug them into compliance. They threaten their families into compliance. And then they go try to get them before they get to court to actually make sure they don't testify. She was able to introduce that into evidence. And he was convicted within like 20 minutes and sentenced to 10 years in state prison. So I want to tell you one other thing that we have done, it's worked very well for us, is, and I think most states have RICO statutes. The federal government has theirs, of course, ours is very similar. I used the RICO statute, I think we were the first ones. Most of you know what the RICO is, right? The racketeering statute. This is where you have to show something is organized. So you're not going just against the pimp and the victim, you're looking at the whole organization. And I'll give you an example. And I know I'm standing between you and your lunch, so I'm going to wrap it up fairly quickly. We found that another universe of victims, remember I told you they're runaways, they're in our neighborhoods, are children that are in our care of the Department of Children and Family Services. And I'm sure every state throughout our nation has the equivalent. They're the ones that are charged with taking care of abused, neglected children, otherwise unwanted children. So these girls that live in foster care homes are absolute magnets for these predators. So let me give you a case, a real life case. These aren't theories. We had and thankfully this is where we always say we need 1 million eyes. As the whole public awareness has grown on human trafficking, there's a counselor in one of our foster care homes. She hears the girls talking on the phone. Okay, $30 to me, okay, great. Can I bring my friend Tiffany? I'm making these names up. Can I bring my friend Tiffany? All right, I'll meet you at school. And she's doing all this, and then you can hear her talking to another girl. Do you want to come with us? You can make some easy money. That counselor knew something was wrong. She didn't know what it was. She immediately called us, and we immediately got into this, and this is what we found. There were 4 men. There was the recruiter. He would find them in the foster care homes. He would recruit them. He'd get them to recruit their friends. He would then there was the transporter. The transporter would go to the foster care home, pick them up, sometimes take them to school. Then after school, they'd pick them up from school and take them to the third guy who owned a house, a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house in Homestead. And then there was the 4th guy who would do all the solicitation with the Johns. This went on for quite some time. That these girls, almost every day, were subjected to being in a house in Homestead when everybody thought that they were in a foster care home being taken care of. And we ended up being able to break that ring, and we filed charges against all 4 of those men. 2 of them are now in state prison for 15 years, and we're working on the other 2. We used the RICO statute, which gives us a very strong, because clearly this was organized. Yeah. So I throw that out for those that might be listening to this somewhere else in the country that may want to take a look at the RICO statutes. Last, I want to talk about how you recruit your public. I was very blessed, and we have such a great community here in Miami. They're just amazing. So in addition to all the wonderful stakeholders that we work hand in hand with, our law enforcement, et cetera, we went to the business sector. We said we need to establish a hotline where everybody now who's starting to understand, as we have as an office, and victim witness counselors, and the U.S. Attorney, and all of our other partners, we now know what human trafficking is. How do we get that message out so that we have a million ears and eyes looking for all of us? So we developed a hotline with we have a local one that's called Switchboard. Some of you may know them. We raised a little money. Some of our banks were wonderful. They're paying for Switchboard to handle our calls. And then we started a campaign. Maybe some of you that live here in and around Miami, maybe you've seen this. And we started with a bunch of different messages, but this one because this was trying to catch everybody's attention, that this isn't, when I started this presentation, like I said, I thought it was. It is not foreigners and containers for the most part. And if they are, Barbara's on top of them. This is our kids, right, Barbara? These are our kids. Start at the age 13. They start as runaways. And so if you see somebody, what do? There's a hotline number. And unbelievable, if you can't see it all, Tamara, you've got some cards, would you mind? Tamara's going to hand those out. What we did in our community here was I went to some of the elected officials. So we need your help. This is what we're finding, and sort of explain to them what I've explained to you in a much longer version. Went to the private sector, Clear Channel, CBS, Outboard, Von Wagner, I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody that worked with us. And we raised the money to do the mock-ups, and they gave free space. Bus shelters, just went up, 100 bus shelters, bunch of billboards, free time, LEDs, free time. And that is really a reflection of a great community, because they wanted to participate, they wanted to do their share, and this is what they've come up with. And I really recommend some of these to any of these tools. I could talk much longer about this, but I already see I've way extended your patience. I thank you very much, truly, for focusing on this. I wanted to come and share. I'm very proud and pleased that you invited me to come and share some of these insights with you. I want to thank the Hispanic National Bar for coming to Miami and being here. We want to wish Michelle, right, a lot of good luck in her future roles. And thank St. Thomas University, School of Law in particular. They produce wonderful lawyers, by the way, many of whom, I'm proud to say, work with us. Do you have any, Barbara, that work with you? Yes. So I hope that I've been somewhat insightful. I hope that these are some of the things that you were hoping to hear and in some ways hoping not to hear. I'm smiling as I leave, but I will tell you that oftentimes our heart breaks. In the office, truly it does. Tamaya and I spend many days and nights talking about the horrors of this modern day slavery that exists in these dark shadows of our community. So thank you for allowing me to share some of this with you. Thank you for caring about it. And I hope that you all will do what you can, and I know that you will, to keep up this fight against human trafficking. Thank you all very much.
Sure, if you have a little time for questions, or do you need to run, maybe we can take a few minutes for questions for the state attorney. Yes, in the back, please.
The card hasn't, hi.
Oh, hi, I'm sorry.
The card hasn't made it back to me yet, so I
Oh, you
don't
want
see
the
what it
hotline
says,
number?
but,
Thank you. Yeah, it is 305. It's 305-350.
oh, I see it now.
Okay, well, let me repeat it for the ones that are joining us, if that's okay, through, I guess, the website. 305-350-5569 is our Miami hotline. Oh, my goodness, I should have put my glasses on. 305-350-5567. Thank you.
So my question is this, and I apologize if it's already happening in Miami. I travel a lot, and I've seen in a lot of other cities, on the back of bathroom stalls in airports, in restaurants, in hotel lobbies. It doesn't look like this. Stickers that talk about human trafficking, that tell people to report it if they see it. I saw it in LA and San Francisco a few weeks ago. I've seen it in the Midwest. I don't remember if I've seen it in Miami, to be honest. But the question is that happening in Miami? Has it been successful in getting tips? And are you aware if that's really working in other cities?
What I can tell you is we are lagging a little bit behind in that regard. We have started it. I actually want to thank the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. They started something similar. And I often say there's a lot of similarities between domestic violence and victims of human trafficking. And for many, many years, we've had on the inside of women's bathrooms, it's called Shalom Bayit. And it has, don't be a victim of domestic violence, and they have a hotline number. So that same concept is now being put into place for specifically victims of human trafficking. We're not there fully yet, but we're going in that direction.
Hi, my name is Alexandra. Great presentations, everybody. This question's for everyone. It's following the theme of the demand side. I know in Sweden that prostitution is legal, but the purchasers is not. It's criminalized, and I guess they go after them, the ones who actually do the purchasing, the Johns. So I wanted to know the statute, if it makes a distinction between the suppliers and the purchasers, and then what has been done in that aspect for enforcing, if that's a law here in the United States.
I take it this is a question about whether or not the Nordic model, which is the practice of criminalizing the people who are trying to buy sex as opposed to criminalizing those who are selling sex,
Right.
whether that's going to be a viable approach here in the United States.
Well, it's interesting, right now, it's the same statute federally, for whether you're a buyer or not. Trafficking is trafficking. You may be obtaining someone versus transporting someone. You may be receiving someone, but it's the same statute, which actually makes our partnership with the state, in my view, more important, because that means that with a 15-year mandatory minimum, I can't distinguish between the person that is actually prostituting the victim versus the person who comes in, let's just say it's a minor, a 14-year-old victim. That's easier. There are other statutes that you can charge for the customer, child exploitation statutes. But as far as adult prostitution goes, or adult trafficking, it's difficult to prove that the customer knew, if this is the first time he's paid for sex with this adult woman, that she was being beaten behind the scenes by her pimp. So for us, we really do rely on, and I rely on my partners at the state to help with any potential charges for customers who are not exploiting minors, because I think the minor one is easier, and who are not clearly repeat customers, people who should have known. Reckless disregard, we have that element. If we can show that he should have known that she was being beaten, we can make that argument. But if it's a first-time customer, that's not going to happen. So to be frank with you, on the federal side, because we don't have a law that distinguishes between the customer and the trafficker, it's all the same law, or the pimp, then we're trying to get the customers going to the state. Does that answer your question?
Well, only that, is there a big case for going after the purchasers? I'm wondering, in general. the people who are in law
Yes.
enforcement.
I mean, there are efforts made, definitely, to try to get Johns, and there are undercover operations all the time. The problem is that the proof for trafficking is difficult to prove against Johns, and we do not have a separate federal law that makes it a crime for somebody to try to buy a victim. So we don't have that here.
But local, I'm sorry to interrupt. No. But local law enforcement, I'm involved with Fort Lauderdale police, they do have a lot of sting operations, and they do go after the Johns.
Absolutely, and we rely on the state for
Yeah,
criminal
it's not
prosecution
federal.
of the Johns, yes.
In fact, I just wanted to piggyback on that just for a second, because what Barbara said is true. And I think I mentioned that I think we sent the first John to state prison for 10 years. So we obviously were focused on the Johns, and we have completely changed our policy. But sometimes law enforcement has to make a decision who your witness is going to be. So I'm sure for Fort Lauderdale Police or Barbara, sometimes you're going to have a trade-off there. Now, so you might have to use him as a key witness to testify against the pimp. And of course, that pimp and that predator is far more, I guess in my eyes, and certainly the eyes of the law, far more culpable. That is the predator. He is the ultimate abuser. So sometimes you have to make those kind of trade-offs and make a prosecution case.
I guess this question may be directed to Ms. Martinez and Ms. Fernandez-Rundle, and it's a benefits question, three-part. Not that they're all related, but the first one is, since a lot of us are immigration attorneys, what importance or where in the pecking order of all of the processing that you do in your prosecution do you let the victim know that they can be represented and probably should be represented by an immigration attorney? And then what partnerships locally do you have with some of the nonprofits that do a lot of this amazing anti-trafficking work, and have a holistic approach to that? For example, La Vida. Mujer, perfect, yes.
Yeah.
And I know that the partnerships in Miami-Dade are to be modeled really across the state. So I just wondered about that, or if it's your vision that, bringing in another lawyer in the case is gonna complicate the prosecution, but.
The answer could be yes to all of the
Yes.
above.
Exactly. But I think it's important that they do need an attorney, because you guys are prosecuting, and the interest of the victim and what she tells you can really adversely impact her immigration case. Let me just get to the second part real quick. The second issue is how often, if ever, does the victim approach you with their need to protect their family members, especially if they're immigrants and their family members are overseas? Okay, if you can protect my mom and my little brothers and sisters and bring them here, and I know they're not gonna be killed by the trafficking ring, how often do you employ that help from the State Department or other international players? And then the third part of my question is, when kids, especially in Florida, don't have a safe house to stay in, is it still possible to send them to another state where they have, the DOJ or the DHHS has safe homes for these kids, and for the need for the kids to be removed from the immediate danger is so apparent?
I'm going to take a stab at it first, I'm going to hear with you. Okay, in terms of working with partners and them needing lawyers, absolutely. In fact, you mentioned some of the people we work with. We work with the immigration lawyers. CAVA, which is our local Cuban American Bar Association, just got a $50,000 grant. They're going to assign one lawyer just to work with our victims, whether they're immigrants or not. They need to be heard, especially if they're underage, and we have guardians that are appointed. I'm talking about legal guardians as well as people guardians, if you know what I mean, caretaker guardians. The other thing we do is we work very closely with our immigration partners with our U visas and the T visas. And oftentimes the lawyers will call us, I'm sure this happens with you all the time, Barbara, and say, I need to extend this, or she's working with you. And so we take a very broad view of that. In terms of the ones that are brought here, from other countries for the purpose of being victims of human trafficking, that's really probably more Barbara's side of the equation, and I'm sure she has some information for you as well.
Right, so I echo that it's really critical for us to work with immigration attorneys. I will tell you, probably 10 years ago, 9 years ago, I was not that thrilled about having more lawyers in it. But I've learned that it's absolutely critical, and we've built some really great relationships because I'm not an immigration lawyer. I'm not specialized in that, and we, our specialty is the criminal process, and we need other people to help us with that. So we do that, and as far as family members, we have in fact brought in a lot of victims, family members, especially victims that we've had from Mexico, who have, the Tenancingo area is an area that is known for its trafficking problem. We've had many victims in Homestead and West Palm Beach from that area, and their family members were often their children were being held in homes in Mexico, and we worked with the Mexican government to raid those locations there, and we were blessed that the prosecutions there went well, and the children were reunited, and sometimes it's more than just the children. It may be a mother, it may be other people. We've been very successful, and we still nationally do not hit the maximum number of visas that are out there. But in South Florida, I think we do a pretty good job of that. And finally, we have had victims who are minors that have to be sent elsewhere in the past. And it makes it very challenging for a number of reasons, but we have done that, and we do have networks in which to do that if it's necessary. It's obviously a last resort, but.
My least favorite part of being a moderator is having to shut down really wonderful conversations. But because we are somewhat behind schedule, I'm going to say we should go to our next presentation, which I believe is by the two staff attorneys at the VIII Legal Aid Society, Diana Vigiano.
It's actually spelled wrong. It's Dana Vigiano.
Dana Vigiano, there we go. And Melissa Oromas.
And we will speak so very quickly because we know that we are past our time for everything. So I'm going to start now as I walk, if that's okay. We are two staff attorneys for VIII Legal Aid Society. As you know, Legal Aid Societies focus on getting representation for the indigent members of our society, of our communities. So we are going to be touching on kind of the civil side of what we've been dealing with today. We love and appreciate the international and the criminal discussion. We don't really touch that because we have experts to do that. As legal aid, there are a few different things that we do. We handle cases that are domestic violence. We have family law, guardianship and probate, housing and foreclosure, bankruptcy, employment law. Again, I'm going to talk very quickly, so I'm so sorry that I'm just kind of rambling on really fast. We have arts and intellectual property law. We have a new project that's helping startup businesses deal with all of the incorporation issues. And then our favorite topic, child advocacy, dependency law. We are what you would call in the dependency courtrooms attorneys ad litem. We are appointed by the judges to represent the foster child directly. We are that child's attorney. We're that child's voice. There's another program called the Guardian Ad Litem program, who's wonderful. We work with them, fantastic. At the end of our little spiel, I'm going to ask for your action. We've been hearing a lot about talk, 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 talk. Where's the action? We need local people. We need attorneys to take cases on pro bono. We will be your mentors. We will show up to court with you if that's necessary. Obviously, answer all your questions. For non-attorneys, the Guardian Ad Litem program takes in volunteers to be that voice for the child in the courtroom. We have 5 attorneys on our child advocacy team who are specifically in the dependency courtrooms, the civil side of dependent children. We are dealing with abuse, abandonment, and neglect of these children. It's Chapter 39 of the Florida statutes. Trying to go quickly. Human trafficking work. Human trafficking work pops up in our realm when you have a foster child, and this has already been talked about by many people. It's been really wonderful to hear all the discussion about our foster youth.
group homes are actually a huge target for a lot of these traffickers because you have a bunch of teenage girls in one home who have been abused, don't have other people who really love them in their life. They don't have family, most of them. Some of them do, obviously. Most don't have family contacts. They don't have friends contact. They've been abused. We're talking about people who have experienced that trauma. So that's a focus. And when we get red flags, that child gets an attorney. It goes to a specific judge in the dependency courtroom. Obviously, the criminal side is handling the trafficker. We might assist in helping our youth during the criminal process just by being by that person. But we are specifically in charge of making sure that the child's being taken care of by the Department of Children and Families, which is so wonderful, and obviously providing care to these youth that don't have any home. Placement, huge issue. We got to make sure, what's the placement of this person? Is it a group home? Is it a safe group home? There wasn't a safe group home. And I had a case where there was a child and the group home was targeted and nobody knew what was going on. The guys would come in and out of the window. So immediately, red flags. We got the house shut down, moved the children. Obviously, therapy for this trauma is so important. As an attorney ad litem, if you take a case or as a volunteer, non-attorney volunteer, you will make sure that what is the placement of this child? Is it appropriate? Are they receiving trauma-based therapy by a licensed therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever mental health or medical needs that they have? Are they being addressed? We love DCF. They're overworked. They're underpaid. So we need to make sure that everything is being done appropriately. We need to make sure that school is happening. A lot of times they are enrolled in a school, they're not going to school because they have a lot of other issues happening, obviously. So we want to make sure that they understand school's a safe place. You have a whole team of teachers here, guidance counselors, all these wonderful people who want to see you succeed. And they do. As soon as you have any kind of help for these kids, they just, in my case, I can't say in all cases, they do blossom when you have this one-on-one interaction with them. So I know that this is a horrific topic that we're talking about, but we love our jobs. We get to come in and help them in maybe, in the international scheme of things, these might be very tiny things that we're doing. But for that one girl, for that one boy that we're helping, this is huge. And we have seen some really great outcomes from that.
Well, and let me give her a chance
Yes,
to breathe. It's not only that one child, but once you go to that one child, they have friends, and it's unbelievable. I always find how foster kids know each other. Like, they go into the foster care system, and all of a sudden, it's like this giant web that they know this person and that person. They meet at aisle staffings that they have. They meet in school. They just know each other. They pass from home to home. They're like, oh, I lived with her, 2 months ago. So if you get to one child, it eventually will spread. But that's one of the biggest things that we need, even if you're whether you're a lawyer or not, you can be a mentor to a child. So even if you don't have time and the capacity to go to court, or you just don't feel comfortable in the dependency world, I would say a big part of my job obviously is legal, but a huge part of my job is just being a mentor, just being someone that the person can talk to, that can call and be like, I want to go back and do this, and I have to kind of talk them down from the ledge and be like, no, there's other choices, there's other options. So if you can help in that and just be available on the phone for someone, it's such a huge difference.
And also, I've heard there's lots of immigration attorneys. Our cases, whether it's human trafficking or not, there's all kinds of issues that pop up in the foster care cases. I just had a case that I was sitting in the courtroom and listening, and the foster child had been on runaway and was hit by a car. Well, now there's a whole settlement issue. I mean, we needed a civil litigation attorney at the very beginning of the human trafficking of minors, the very beginning, when the law enforcement were arresting these girls. We got criminal defense attorneys. We were standing in the courtrooms, and all of a sudden I realized I get a call from the case manager, and the case manager says, so-and-so's being transported to this precinct. And I go, ah! And I call my director immediately, and I say, we need a criminal defense attorney, and thank God we have this pool of volunteer attorneys who are there to help. So, whether you're immigration, you're criminal defense, you're civil litigation, your whatever your specialty is, there will be a need at some point for that specific issue, because we don't know that stuff. We can talk all day about dependency law, but we don't know that. So there is a place for everybody to help. I have, obviously, DadeLegalAid.org is our big, our Miami-Dade Legal Aid Society website. I have referral forms if you'd like to sign up, just to get in our database. I mean, obviously, you don't have to take these cases. If you hear a case and you love the case, we will find a way for you to help. And again, it's a very sad issue, but we love what we do. And you might not have great outcomes, but you're going to have an overall experience where you're actually doing something to better this person's life.
These kids are difficult, they don't always want
They're
to help.
difficult,
They
they're
don't
gonna
want
run, they're gonna curse at you, they're teenagers. They've been in an abusive home, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to sugarcoat by saying we love our jobs, it's so wonderful, but you get a good experience out of it. So if you would like to volunteer, we'll be outside or down here, wherever, so come talk to us.
Keep doing a good job. You're great.
Thank you.
I'm going to make it quick, we've been here all day. An estimated 60,000 undocumented migrants have entered the U.S. since 2013. Of that number, only 25% are from Mexico and the remainder are from Central America, the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Recently, there have been media and numerous articles that are suggesting a link between federal legislation that Barbara covered earlier, the TVPA, that was signed by President Bush in 2008, and the influx of immigrant children. The argument then goes that unless we amend federal legislation or outright do away with it, our sovereignty will continue to be threatened. To dispel the false beliefs about the TVPA, the current smuggling crisis, to counter racism, and to ensure that legal protections afforded under federal law are actually implemented, the Hispanic National Bar Association has recently established a task force. It's called the Taskforce on the Minors Humanitarian Crisis. We are going to begin our work in Texas, Arizona, and other states with high rates of undocumented minors awaiting immigration hearings or deportation. As an organization of attorneys, judges, scholars, it's our obligation to not only educate our members, but to educate citizens, media, lawmakers about ongoing modern-day slavery, especially here in our borders. To work towards immigration reform, to address smuggling and other non-related immigration issues that come up on a daily basis. The next time you hear arguments that federal legislation is, quote, green light for the border crisis that we are facing, you have to tell them that they're just plain wrong. First, under the federal law, a minor has to be unaccompanied, meaning they have no parents, guardians, family members within the United States. But the research and recent testimony before Congress earlier this week actually establishes that these minors have relatives in the U.S., so they are not unaccompanied. And number two, the element of coercion that you find in trafficking is just not available in smuggling. They are entering our borders for voluntarily because of numerous socioeconomic issues which we just don't have time to cover. The federal legislation is designed to protect victims of trafficking. It's not the impetus for the smuggling crisis in our borders. And finally, I just want to correct a statement that I heard earlier about prostitution being the oldest profession. It's actually the oldest oppression. By hosting a human trafficking conference, I hope that everyone from the federal to the state to the nonprofit to the religious levels have learned and are able to take these resources onto the ground on a daily basis with the fantastic work that you do. I've had the honor of hosting the Human Trafficking Conference for the HBNA Miami for 3 years, but as I move on, I hope that my colleagues will do an even better job than I was able to do. Thank you very much to our corporate sponsors, especially Gabriela Groves. Without her getting the sponsorship, we wouldn't be here and we would all be building today. Thank you to St. Thomas and everyone else.